I woke up in the body of the sixth prince, Yunzhong, the most pathetic prince in the entire Qin dynasty. My new body's mother was just a palace maid, no powerful family behind me, no allies, nothing. To make it worse, the original Yunzhong somehow ended up with a blood letter from the former crown prince, proof that the third prince had framed the crown prince for treason. That made me a target. The third prince wanted that letter badly and was ready to kill me for it. When I came to, my own serving maids were whispering behind my back, calling me a coward and a waste of space. They figured I'd be dead soon anyway. I couldn't even argue. The old Yunzhong literally scared himself to death over this mess, and that's how I ended up here. But I'm not him. I made a decision right there in the courtyard. Forget the palace politics. I'd head to the border and build real military power. I studied command and warfare back in my old life. That's my strength. With an army behind me, nobody pushes me around. Before I could leave, the third prince showed up. He strutted into my courtyard demanding I hand over whatever the crown prince's man had given me. I played dumb and told him there was nothing. He didn't buy it. Then he ordered my own guards to arrest me as a traitor, and my maids, the ones I'd never once mistreated, immediately backed him up with made-up stories about me plotting rebellion and poisoning the emperor. That was the last straw. I kicked the third prince right between the legs as hard as I could. He dropped to the ground screaming. Everyone froze. Nobody could believe the coward prince just did that. When the guards tried to grab me, I shouted them down. I told them I was still a prince of this dynasty and no one lays a hand on me. I said I'd go confess to the emperor myself, and I walked straight out of there. I'd already burned the blood letter the moment I arrived in this body. Let them search all they want. And that kick? Consider it a down payment. Once I get my hands on real power, the third prince is first on my list. I headed straight to the main hall where my father, the emperor, was dealing with a crisis. The northern kingdom of Beihuan had a locust plague and was demanding grain from us, with 200,000 cavalry parked at the border as a friendly reminder. The court was split between fighting and giving in, and my father couldn't decide. Right in the middle of all that, the third prince's mother, noble consort Shu, burst in crying, screaming that I'd kicked her precious son's manhood and he might never be a real man again. My father didn't even believe her at first. Everyone knew me as a spineless coward. How could I possibly do something like that? Then the guard announced I was outside, asking to come in and confess. That shut everyone up fast. They brought me in. My father was furious, demanding an explanation. The third prince's uncle, Duke Su, immediately called for me to be stripped of my title and made a commoner. His whole faction piled on, one after another. Not a single person in that hall spoke up for me. Looking at them all, I felt even more certain. Staying in this palace meant death. I had to get out. My father gave me a chance to explain myself, but I didn't bother. Instead, I admitted guilt on the spot. Then I asked him to sentence me to death. The entire hall went dead silent. Nobody expected that. Even Duke Su and the consort were stunned. A prince doesn't get executed over a kick. Everyone knew that. But here I was, asking for it myself. My father was shaken. He demanded to know why I wanted to die. That's when I made my real move. I put on my most tragic face and said I'd been useless my whole life. I didn't want to die uselessly too. I begged him to let me go to the border so I could die fighting gloriously on the battlefield. Duke Su saw right through it. He knew I was trying to escape the capital, and he couldn't let that happen. They still wanted that blood letter. He objected, saying it would be a national embarrassment if a prince died in battle. I stood tall and fired back. Common men's sons can die fighting for this dynasty, so why can't a prince lead by example? Since the founding of our nation, no prince has ever died on the battlefield. And that's exactly why this country isn't stronger. If someone has to be the first, let it be me. My speech hit harder than I expected. Several military officials actually spoke up for me, saying a prince willing to die on the battlefield would be a huge boost to army morale. Even my father started nodding along. But Duke Su tried to ruin it again. He argued that if I got captured by the enemy, it would humiliate the whole dynasty. That actually gave me an idea. I asked my father to grant me an imperial sword, so I could kill myself before ever being taken prisoner. Having a sword personally bestowed by the emperor would also be useful for pulling rank at the border later. To sell it, I recited a sad poem about how living or dying didn't matter much to me. This world felt like a foreign land either way. My father heard it, and for the first time ever, I saw his eyes get wet. I think he realized he'd completely neglected me my whole life. Then the imperial doctor came in and reported that the third prince was fine, just needed a few days of rest. My father calmed down and told me to just apologize to my brother and forget the whole thing. That was the worst possible outcome for me. I needed to get out of the capital, not stay here and wait to be killed. I looked over at Duke Su and the consort, hoping they'd object and push the argument further. But they stayed quiet this time. Useless. So I threw myself on the floor and begged again. I said I wanted to die gloriously in battle. My father got angrier. He yelled that my eldest brother had just killed himself after the failed rebellion. Was I trying to punish him by dying too? Even the consort suddenly switched sides and told me to drop it, promising she wouldn't pursue the matter. Everyone in the hall started urging me to stop. None of that was going to save me. I knew if I stayed, I was dead anyway. So I went all in. I declared that if my father wouldn't let me go, I'd smash my head against the pillars of this hall right here and now. The whole court went silent. My father was absolutely furious. With a face like iron, he finally gave in. He appointed me General Huli and ordered me to head north to the border after marrying the daughter of General Shin Nanjung, a woman named Shun Luoyan. The general title was way better than I'd hoped. I was expecting maybe a minor officer rank. But the marriage order? I never asked for that. I asked for a sword, old man, not a wife. A woman would only slow me down. Whether I liked it or not, the emperor had given his order, so I had to deal with it. I figured I'd make the best of the situation. A prince's wedding meant every court official would have to send gifts. Perfect chance to collect money. I'd need funds for the border anyway. But staying in the capital for the wedding also meant the third prince and his people would have time to come after me. I needed to watch my back. On the way to the Shun family estate, the head eunuch Mu Shun told me about them. 5 years ago, my father got trapped by the northern enemy during a campaign. General Shin Nanjung led 10,000 soldiers to attack the enemy's rear and save my father's life. But the general and both his sons died in the process. The whole family sacrificed everything for the emperor. Now my father was marrying off the general's only surviving daughter to me, a prince everyone expected to die in battle. It felt like he was taking advantage of a family of widows and orphans. We arrived at the Shun estate and were greeted by Lady Shun and her household. I noticed right away that they greeted Mu Shun before me. Either they didn't respect me at all, or they genuinely forgot I outranked a eunuch. Probably the first one. When Mu Shun read out the imperial decree, the whole room went into shock. Shun Luoyan, my bride-to-be, was furious. She stood up and flat out refused the order. She told Mu Shun to go back and tell the emperor she'd rather die. She even said she'd wait at home for him to send poison or a silk rope to hang herself with. I had to admit, this woman had guts. Publicly defying an imperial decree? That was exactly the kind of stunt I'd just pulled myself. The difference was, I asked to die because I wanted to live. She seemed like she actually meant it. Also, was I really that bad? She'd rather die than marry me? Mu Shun warned her coldly. Refusing an imperial decree didn't just mean her death. By law, it meant her entire extended family would be executed. That finally made her hesitate. Her sister-in-law grabbed her arm, begging her to think about the family. She had a little daughter, not even 6 years old. Lady Shun was shaking with rage, demanding to know what her family had done to deserve this humiliation. Mu Shun gave Shun Luoyan one last chance to accept. The imperial guards put their hands on their weapons. The tension was suffocating. Then a little girl started crying, and that sound cut through everything. The crying child was Shun Nianqi, Shun Lian's niece, barely 6 years old, the only child left from her eldest brother's bloodline. That broke Shun Luoyan. She looked at the little girl's tearful face, unclenched her fists, and dropped to her knees. She accepted the decree. After Mu Shun left, I stayed behind to talk with the family. Shun Luoyan glared at me with pure disgust and told me not to expect any gratitude. I shrugged and told her about my plan, that I'd been appointed General Huli and was heading to the northern border to die in battle after our wedding. The room went dead quiet. Then the reality hit them. The emperor was marrying his daughter figure off to a man he was sending to his death. Lady Shun would basically be watching her daughter become a widow before the marriage even mattered. The Shun women had already lost all their men to war. Now the emperor wanted to add one more widow to the collection. Lady Shun slammed her palm on the table and shattered it into pieces. I nearly jumped out of my skin. My future mother-in-law was apparently a martial arts expert. She wanted to storm the palace with her husband's memorial tablet and confront the emperor. The second sister-in-law backed her up. But the eldest sister-in-law, Wei Shuang, shook her head sadly. She figured out the emperor's real intention. He wanted Shen Luoyan to bear me a child before I went off to die. Shen Luoyan screamed she'd rather bash her head and then give me an heir. I couldn't help teasing her. I said even if we both died, the emperor would probably have us buried together. Her face twitched with rage. This woman had guts, but maybe not the sharpest mind. I told them seriously not to bother going to the palace to protest. It would only make things worse. Then I left. Back at my courtyard, I found the guards had been replaced by 2 men from the Imperial Guard, Zhou Mi and Gao He. Either my father sent them to spy on me, or to protect me from the third prince's people. Probably both. I played it cool. Inside, my treacherous maids were waiting, terrified. Good. I ordered every single one of them to kneel and slap their own faces, and not to stop until I said so. I told Gao He to watch them. If anyone held back, he'd do the slapping for them. The sound of palms hitting cheeks filled the whole courtyard. These women had lied about me to the third prince's face just hours ago. I couldn't kill them. Acting too ruthless too fast would raise suspicion. But I wasn't about to let traitors off easy either. Even the most patient man alive wouldn't forgive what they did. That night, a lot happened that I didn't know about at the time. My father sent his shadow guards to investigate what really went down at my courtyard. When he found out the third prince had tried to drag me to prison without imperial permission, he was furious. He understood then why I'd been so desperate to die. I was being cornered with no way out. He also figured what everyone already knew. There was no chance I'd been part of the crown prince's rebellion. I had nothing to offer a conspirator. No soldiers, no brains, no connections. Only an idiot would recruit me. My father was less impressed with how I handled the traitor maids, though. He'd replace my guards with imperial soldiers specifically so I'd have the muscle to punish them properly. He basically handed me the stick, and I barely tapped them with it. He called me useless for only making them slap themselves. Then he ordered his shadow guards to drag the maids out and beat them to death. The emperor doesn't forgive betrayal the way I do. He also found out I didn't even have a proper residence. At 21, I was still living in my childhood quarters inside the palace. He'd simply forgotten I existed. He ordered a confiscated trader's mansion cleaned up overnight and given to me, with servants arranged by proper protocol. Lady Xin and her family had gone to kneel outside the palace gates in protest. My father told Mu Shun to pass them a message. He was sending me to the border to build a career, not to die. Whether that was true or just words to calm them down, I couldn't say. Meanwhile, at the third prince's estate, things were getting dangerous. Duke Su scolded his nephew for the stupid move of accusing me of treason. Nobody in the empire would believe it. But then they started planning something worse. The Northern Kingdom's diplomatic envoy was arriving in a few days. Their new scheme was to manipulate me into offending the foreigners. Since my father didn't want war, he'd be forced to punish me severely to keep the peace. But punishment wasn't enough for them. The third prince wanted me dead before I ever reached the border. They planned to make it a killing blow, no chance of survival, the same way they destroyed the former crown prince. I had no idea any of this was coming. The next morning, Mu Shun came with good news. My father gave me a proper mansion, confiscated from some convicted official. I was glad to finally be outside the palace walls where I could move more freely, but I worried my father might change his mind about sending me north after the wedding. The mansion came with over 30 servants and 6 guards, all arranged by my father, which meant any number of them could be spies. I needed to find my own loyal people eventually. I decided to ride a horse instead of taking a carriage. I'd never ridden one before and nearly made a fool of myself climbing on, but I was heading to war. I had to learn sometime. My 2 guards rode on either side of me the whole way, clearly expecting me to fall off any second. I told Zhou Mi I wanted to host a housewarming banquet and invite court officials. He awkwardly tried to warn me nobody would show up. That was exactly what I was counting on. I didn't need their faces, I needed their gift money. A prince sends personal invitations. You have to send a gift even if you don't attend. Squeeze them at the housewarming, squeeze them again at the wedding. That's how I'd fund my army. At the Shin estate, I found a young man visiting, Yuan Gui, a cavalry officer whose father was one of the third prince's biggest supporters. He'd clearly come to see Shen Luoyan, not the sister-in-law he claimed to be visiting. The second sister-in-law, Yi Zi, was quick-witted enough to cover for him, saying Yuan Gui was her relative who'd come to invite her horseback riding. Then Lady Shun and the eldest sister-in-law both made excuses and left the room. One claimed to be sick, the other said she needed to watch her daughter study. They were deliberately snubbing me in front of an outsider. The whole family had decided to show me disrespect while keeping up just enough politeness to avoid trouble. Yuan Gui smirked and said they were all heading out for a ride, basically dismissing me. Shen Luoyan sneered and asked if I even knew how to ride a horse. Instead of getting angry, I put on my most admiring face and begged Yuan Gui to teach me riding skills since I was going to the battlefield soon. He looked at me like I was an idiot. Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted him to think. This fool was connected to the third prince's faction, and he'd just walked right into my hands. I was already planning how to use him. Yuan Gui agreed to teach me riding, eager to show off in front of Shen Luoyan. She didn't want to come at first, but he talked her into it by promising she'd get to watch me embarrass myself. Fine by me. Let them all underestimate me. Outside the Shun estate, Yuan Gui mounted his horse with a flashy one-handed jump, practically begging for applause. I praised him like he was the greatest horseman alive, while laughing inside. Then I started my performance. I fumbled getting on the horse several times, looking completely hopeless. Shen Luoyan turned away in disgust. Even the Shen family servants were biting their lips, trying not to laugh. Then I asked Yuan Gui to give me a push. The moment he put his hand on me, I kicked off hard on purpose, flew over the saddle, and tumbled off the other side. Zhou dove underneath me to break my fall. I landed right on top of him. Yuan Gui burst out laughing. Shen Luoyan laughed too. That's when he realized everyone else was staring at him like he was the biggest fool alive. A cavalry officer just pushed a prince off a horse and laughed about it, in front of witnesses. Gao He immediately roared at Yuan Gui, accusing him of deliberately pushing me off. Yuan Gui panicked and tried to explain he barely touched me. I jumped in to defend him, saying he probably just didn't control his strength and surely didn't mean it. That made it 10 times worse. Now my guards were completely convinced it was intentional. When Shen Luoyan tried to speak up for Yuan Gui, Gao He shut her down too, reminding her she was about to be a princess and should act like one. Good man, that Gao He said exactly what I was thinking. I waved it all off like a kind fool and said I'd just have my own guards teach me riding instead. As we rode away, I made sure to say, just loud enough for Yuan Gui to hear, that my father's temper was bad lately, and they absolutely must not tell him about this, or he might have Yuan Gui executed. Yuan Gui nearly collapsed on the spot. Even Shen Luoyan scolded him, pointing out that pushing a prince off a horse could be called attempted harm to royalty. She told him to stop visiting the Shun estate from now on. Yuan Gui rode home in a panic, probably ready to beg his father to bring expensive gifts and come apologize before the emperor heard about it, which was exactly my plan. That fool's father was one of the third prince's top supporters who screamed loudest for my punishment yesterday. Now his son just attacked me. Let's see how much that apology cost them. It worked even better than I expected. Yuan Gui's father, General Yuan Song, rushed over with his son and a box of expensive gifts, a full set of white jade wine cups and a wine pot, worth several thousand silver taels. The old man was practically sweating, desperate to settle things before my father found out. I played the clueless, forgiving fool. But before accepting the apology, I casually asked if Yuan Song had decent handwriting. He said it was nothing special. I told him I needed help writing over 100 invitations for my housewarming banquet because I didn't know most court officials by name. He couldn't refuse. I still hadn't officially forgiven his son. So the great General Yuan Song sat in my mansion all afternoon, writing invitation after invitation like my personal secretary, while his son ground the ink. I gave them tea and snacks. Nothing more. When they were finally done and ready to leave, I walked them out. Their horses were waiting, except they weren't their horses. I'd had my servants ride their horses out to deliver invitations earlier and swap them with the cheap pack horses my father had provided. Their 2 war horses were top-quality military breeds, worth 200 or 300 gold pieces combined. What I gave them back were barely worth a couple hundred silver taels. I put on my dumbest face and said I had no idea about horses since I'd just moved in. Yuan Song's face twitched, but what could he say? His son had pushed a prince off a horse. He wasn't in any position to argue over livestock. He forced a smile and said all horses were the same as long as they could be ridden. I nodded along and agreed completely. So in one afternoon, I got a set of jade wine cups, 2 premium war horses, and 100 handwritten invitations, all from a man whose faction wanted me dead yesterday. The father and son rode home on donkey-grade horses, and I'm sure Yuan Song was ready to vomit blood the whole way. This was just the beginning. Those invitations were going out to every official in the capital. Even if nobody showed up to my banquet, they'd still have to send gifts. Every coin counted for what I was building. My first stop with the invitations was Duke Su's mansion, the third prince's uncle himself. Gao He thought I was asking to be humiliated, but I knew exactly what I was doing. Duke Su came out with his family, clearly confused why I was there. He didn't even invite me inside. I handed him the invitation, and he glanced at it, then froze. He recognized the handwriting. It was Yuan Tsong's. The realization hit him hard. One of the third prince's own allies had spent all afternoon writing invitations for me. Once these went out to every official in the capital, everyone would know. His face turned green. He declined the banquet, of course. That's when I delivered my real move. I stammered out, "That's fine, as long as the gift arrives," then immediately pretended to be embarrassed and corrected myself, saying I meant my own manners were what mattered, and they could do whatever they wanted. The more I fumbled, the more trapped he became. A prince personally delivering invitations was such an enormous show of courtesy that refusing to send even a small gift would make him look terrible to the emperor. He forced a smile and promised a gift would arrive. Perfect. Next, I went to Elder Zhang's estate and told him straight up that Duke Su had already promised a gift. Zhang immediately said the same. Gift yes, attendance no. After that, every household I visited gave the same answer. Duke Su and Zhang had set the pattern, and nobody wanted to be the only one who didn't send something. Gao He was embarrassed for me the whole evening, thinking I was being rejected everywhere. He had no idea I was celebrating inside. I didn't want anyone to show up. I wanted their money. No guests meant no food or drinks to pay for. Pure profit. When we got home, I went straight to the stables to look at the 2 warhorses I'd taken from the Yuan family. Gao He told me they were worth 100 gold each. That's 10,000 silver taels per horse. Far more valuable than I'd guessed. I'd basically swapped 2 cheap pack mules for 2 Ferraris. I gave both horses to Gao He and Zhou Mi. They tried to refuse. The gift was too valuable. But I insisted. These 2 were assigned by my father and might be spies, but they were also the only guards I had. Winning their loyalty was worth more than any warhorse. Gao He accepted with visible gratitude in his eyes. I smiled on the outside, but inside I was dead serious. I'd spent a fortune on these 2. If they ever betrayed me, I'd hunt them to the ends of the earth. 2 days later, my housewarming day arrived. Just as planned, gifts poured in all morning, but nobody stepped through the door. Servants and junior family members dropped off presents and left without even coming inside. The outside was busy, the inside was empty. Exactly how I wanted it. No guests meant no expenses. Pure profit. While I was sitting alone counting my blessings, Shen Luoyan showed up. She walked in without bowing and immediately mocked me for not even having a banquet set up. I shrugged and said there was no point wasting food when nobody came. She seemed surprised I wasn't crying about it. She'd expected to find a pathetic mess. I asked if she cried when she got the marriage decree. That made her furious. She marched toward me with her fist clenched. I told her bluntly, "She talks tough, but if she really had the courage to hurt me, she wouldn't have accepted the decree in tears." That shut her up for a moment. She warned me never to touch her, or she'd make me a eunuch. So naturally, I tried to slap her backside. She caught my hand instantly, lightning reflexes. Impressive. She started twisting my arm, hard. It hurt like hell, but I didn't make a sound. I just stared at her. That threw her off. She expected me to scream and beg. Eventually, she let go. Good. Now I knew she was a skilled fighter. That could be useful. Then she dropped something interesting. Her second sister-in-law, Yizi, had figured out that I deliberately fell off the horse to frame Yuan Gui. Smart woman, that Yizi. Shen Luoyan demanded to know if it was true. I admitted it openly and called it classic sixth son behavior. Being the 6th prince meant playing dirty. Then I leaned in close and whispered something bigger. The real reason I was collecting all these gifts was to fund a rebellion once I reached the northern border. Her eyes went wide. She bolted home and told Yizi everything, excited that she could report me to the emperor and cancel the wedding. Yizi nearly laughed in her face. She explained that if Shen Luoyan went to the emperor with this, he'd never believe it. He'd think she was making up treason charges just to avoid the marriage, and he might execute their whole family for it. A man with 3,000 soldiers and 0 allies can't rebel. Everyone knows that. I said it precisely because nobody would ever believe it. Yizi told Shen Luoyan to stop scheming and start paying attention. Her future husband wasn't the useless fool everyone thought. He was hiding his true nature. Yizi decided she needed to have a proper conversation with me herself. which was exactly what I wanted. That woman had a sharp mind, and sharp minds were exactly what I needed on my side. The housewarming hall was massive, roughly 100,000 silver taels worth of gifts, and I didn't spend a single coin on food or drinks since nobody showed up. Even my father sent something, which meant every prince, princess, and official had to follow suit. People I hadn't even invited sent gifts too. My only problem now was figuring out how to turn all this stuff into cash without looking desperate. I decided to wait and combine it with the wedding gifts later. Meanwhile, my father was getting reports about me from his shadow guards. He heard about the horse incident with Yuan Gui and how Yuan Sung ended up writing my invitations and losing 2 premium war horses. But the spies told him it was all accidental. I was just too clueless to realize what I'd done. My father couldn't decide whether to laugh or curse. He secretly ordered his men to find Yuan Gui and beat him up without revealing who sent them. Even the shadow guard was shocked. It wasn't the emperor's usual style. But my father couldn't officially punish Yuan Gui since I'd already accepted the apology, so a secret beating was his compromise. He also heard I sat alone all afternoon looking sad after nobody came to my banquet. He felt sorry for me. He had no idea I was celebrating inside. 2 days later, the Northern Kingdom's envoy arrived. My father had decided to give them the grain. He couldn't risk a war with internal problems still unsettled and other enemy nations watching. That evening, he was hosting a welcome banquet and summoned me to attend with Shen Luoyan. Earlier that day, I'd bought a servant girl who'd almost been sold to a brothel by her gambling father. I named her Xian Shang, meaning new life. I picked up Shen Luoyan from her estate. On my way in, I caught Yi watching me with a knowing smile. I winked at her. She'd clearly understood the message I'd sent through Shen Luoyan, that I wasn't the fool everyone thought. Good. She was sharp, and I wanted her on my side eventually. In the carriage, Shen Luoyan complained that attending the banquet with me would only bring her embarrassment. I told her to just eat, stay quiet, and leave. She said she'd probably choke on insults instead of food. I told her if anyone mocked her, just pretend they were passing gas. She snapped that she didn't have my talent for swallowing humiliation. I shrugged and said if she got herself killed over her temper, my father would just find me another bride. I was headed to the battlefield to die anyway, so nothing she did could hurt me. That shut her up. She was starting to realize that while I might look useless, I could talk circles around her without breaking a sweat. What she didn't know was that I actually wanted people to mock me tonight. I was counting on my royal siblings to insult me, because every insult was an opportunity one could use. We arrived at the Longevity Palace before the banquet started. My brothers and sisters immediately swarmed me with mockery. The 5th prince, the 8th prince, the 2nd prince, they all took turns making fun of me for being invisible, timid, and useless. Even my 13-year-old brother joined in. Shen Luoyan was furious on my behalf, tugging at my sleeve, begging me to say something back. I waited until the moment was ripe, then turned to the 2nd prince with my most pitiful face and asked to borrow money. The laughter died instantly. Nobody expected that. The 2nd prince asked why I needed money. I whined about how expensive running a household was and how I couldn't afford tips for the wedding. He told me to just sell the gifts I received at the housewarming. I hesitated and asked if that was really okay. Wouldn't people talk? He insisted it was perfectly fine, said he even sold things the emperor gave him. That was exactly what I needed to hear. Now I had a royal witness publicly telling me to sell my gifts. If anyone later accused me of liquidating assets to fund a rebellion, I'd point them straight to the 2nd prince. I kept begging for money anyway, and the 2nd prince fled like I was carrying a plague. Every other prince and princess scattered too. In seconds, Shen Luoyan and I were standing completely alone. She was mortified, but I was delighted. The air smelled much better without those idiots around. Then the 3rd prince arrived with his entourage, the center of attention as always. He spotted me and walked over with his fake smile. I asked him cheerfully if his groin still hurt. His face twitched. He leaned in close and whispered that he'd personally make sure I was dead soon. So I immediately shouted it out loud for everyone to hear, that the 3rd prince just threatened to kill me, and I'd rather go ask our father for poison than let him do it. I even threw in that I was planning to rebel in the north, just to show how absurd the whole thing was. Nobody cared about the rebellion part. Everyone knew I couldn't rebel with 100 armies. But the 3rd prince publicly threatening to murder a brother? That was political gold. Every rival faction was already filing it away to use against him. The 3rd prince panicked and backtracked hard, claiming he meant he'd send me off when I left for the border, not kill me. I played the innocent fool and said I didn't believe him. After all, I'd kicked him in his most sensitive area. He swore he'd forgiven me and wanted to make peace. Then I hit him with it. If he really wanted peace, he could prove it by lending me some money. The third prince's face went green, but he couldn't refuse in front of everyone, not after just swearing we'd made peace. I asked for 30,000 taels. He nearly choked. Our monthly allowance as princes was only 1,000 taels each. But he shoved a stack of bank notes into my hand and stormed off. I counted them happily, 13,000 taels. Not bad for a minute's work. After that, nobody dared come near me. They all treated me like a money-sucking plague. I tried the fifth prince, shut down instantly. Turned to the eighth prince. He looked away before I even opened my mouth. Shen Luoyan hissed at me to stop embarrassing myself. She had no idea I was thrilled. We took our seats inside. I was placed between the fifth and eighth princes, which ruined my plan to hide in a corner. While everyone chatted around us, not a single person spoke to me or Shen Luoyan. She was miserable. I used the quiet time to think about how to sell all my gifts and recruit loyal people before heading north. I glanced at Shen Luoyan, wondering if I could bring her around, but she still looked at me with pure contempt. Too risky. Better to work on winning over her second sister-in-law Yizi first. That woman had the brains I needed. Then the emperor arrived, followed by the Beihuan envoy led by their national strategist, Bamboo. These foreigners walked in like they owned the place. Heads high, zero respect. I could feel the rage building across the hall. Bamboo refused to bow to my father. He sneered that in Beihuan, they only bowed to the strong, and a defeated commander didn't deserve their respect. The hall erupted. Officials jumped to their feet shouting. Even the third prince stood up to scold the envoy, trying to score political points. Shen Luoyan tugged at me, wanting me to stand and shout too. I didn't move. She called me a coward in her head. I could practically hear it, and stood up herself to join the crowd. I stayed seated on purpose. There was nothing to gain from yelling at foreigners alongside everyone else. Better to watch and wait. My father handled it with dignity. He stood and announced that if the envoy couldn't show basic manners, the banquet was over. He turned to leave. That forced Bamboo's hand. The strategist called out and said he'd be willing to show respect if our dynasty could prove it deserved any. Then he pulled something out and held it up for everyone to see. My eyes went wide. It was a Rubik's Cube. I recognized what Bamboo was holding immediately, a Rubik's Cube, an ancient version made from jade, but just a basic 3-layer cube. Everyone else in the hall had never seen one before. Bamboo challenged us. Solve this puzzle within half an hour, and his delegation would bow. If nobody could, it would prove our dynasty had neither warriors nor scholars worth respecting. Old General Shao charged up first, thinking he'd crush it in seconds. He couldn't even solve one face. Then the third prince took over, acting all confident. He actually managed to complete one side, and the whole court erupted in praise. People practically begged my father to make him crown prince on the spot. My father nodded approvingly, but I was shaking my head. Getting one face right is the easy part. The idiot had no idea what was coming. Shen Luoyan noticed me shaking my head and accused me of being jealous. I told her he wouldn't be able to finish it. She snapped back. If you're so great, do it yourself. Then I asked if she had feelings for the third prince. She spat and said she wanted nothing to do with anyone in the royal family. Fair enough. At least she wasn't stupid about that. Sure enough, the third prince hit a wall trying the second face. Everything he fixed on one side scrambled another. Sweat dripped down his forehead. Bamboo mocked him. The third prince stubbornly kept going until he had to give up. Then the scholars tried. Then the second prince. One by one, they all failed. Nobody could even get past two faces. Half an hour was almost up. Bamboo turned to my father with a smug grin and declared that our great dynasty had nobody worthy of his respect. No brave warriors, no brilliant minds. My father was shaking with rage. Officials shouted that the puzzle was impossible and Bamboo had rigged the whole thing just to humiliate us. That's when I stood up. I looked straight at Bamboo and said, "Solving that little toy doesn't need half an hour. Half a cup of tea is more than enough." The entire hall went silent. The whole hall looked at me like I'd lost my mind. The useless sixth prince claiming he could solve something that stumped every scholar and prince in the dynasty. Shen Luoyan yanked at my sleeve, begging me to sit down. The second prince barked at me to stop embarrassing everyone. Duke Su threatened me with charges of deceiving the emperor. The third prince pretended to be worried for me while secretly celebrating. They'd been planning to get me killed through the foreign envoy, and here I was volunteering. My father glared at me and ordered me to sit. He was actually trying to protect me, giving me a chance to back down without punishment. But I stayed standing and insisted I could do it. Banbu mocked us all, calling our dynasty a nation of liars. Then he admitted that even he, the creator of this puzzle, couldn't solve it in half a cup of tea's time. When I heard that, I paused. This man invented the thing but didn't know speed-solving techniques? He'd just stumbled onto the concept without understanding the algorithms. That actually made this easier for me. My father tried to have guards drag me away, but Banbu stopped him, pointing out that a prince's words couldn't be taken back, especially in front of a foreign delegation. My father was trapped by his own rules of royal conduct. So I proposed the bet. If I failed to solve the cube in half a cup of tea's time, the envoy wouldn't need to bow to my father. Banbu loved that. Then I added, if I succeeded, they'd kneel using our full court ceremony and return the 3 counties of territory they'd taken 5 years ago. Banbu refused to bet territory, so I sweetened it. If I lost, they could have my head. Take it home and hang it by the river as a trophy. The hall gasped, but then everyone realized I was headed to die anyway. So what difference did it make? Banbu's eyes lit up. A prince's severed head would be a massive prize and a humiliation for our dynasty. He agreed eagerly, already dreaming of displaying my skull at the border. I walked forward and picked up the cube. My father turned away. He couldn't bear to watch. But everyone else stared as I studied the cube for a moment, then moved both hands at once. Before anyone could even process what was happening, I stopped. I held the cube up high. All 6 faces solved. It hadn't taken half a cup of tea. It had taken a few breaths. Banbu's jaw dropped. The 3rd prince and every other prince went pale. Nobody could believe it. Elder Zhang fell to his knees, crying tears of joy, shouting that heaven was blessing our dynasty. The whole court followed, kneeling and celebrating. Even Duke Su and the 3rd prince had to kneel. This was about recovering lost territory, and refusing to celebrate would be political suicide. My father was still facing away, completely confused by the sudden cheering. When Zhang told him I'd won and the lost lands from 5 years ago were coming back, my father ran down from his throne, grabbed the cube from my hands, and stared at it with trembling fingers. His eyes went wet. He kept repeating, "Good, good." He'd never imagined recovering that territory without a war. Old General Shao rushed over, slapped my shoulder hard enough to nearly buckle my knees, then dropped to his knees before me, thanking me for avenging the honor of 1,000,000 soldiers. I quickly helped him up and played it down, said I'd just happened to play with one of these things before. Banbu refused to accept it, insisting I got lucky. I made up a story on the spot. I'd seen the puzzle in an ancient book when I was 10, and even built a version with 16 squares per face. Far more complex than his simple toy. Nobody could disprove it since all witnesses from my old quarters were gone. Banbu's face twisted with rage. Then I noticed the fine knife hanging at his belt. He said it was a treasured blade personally given by the Northern King. I proposed another bet, same game, except this time I'd solve the cube blindfolded. If I won, every weapon the entire envoy carried stayed with us. If I lost, they could take my head. Banbu had already told my father that a prince's words couldn't be taken back, so when my father tried to stop me, Banbu threw those same words right back at him. My father shot me a murderous look, but had no choice except to allow it. I could practically hear his thoughts. If I dared bet anything involving national affairs, he'd kill me himself. The hall went completely silent, waiting to see if I could actually solve a Rubik's Cube with my eyes closed. Everyone thought I was insane. My father was shaking with anger. Shen Luoyan had given up trying to save me. The 3rd prince could barely contain his joy, certain I was about to die. Banbu agreed to the bet without hesitation. Trading some knives for a prince's head seemed like the deal of a lifetime. I handed the cube to Banbu and let him scramble it himself, so he couldn't claim I cheated. My father gave me one last chance to back out, promising no punishment. Officials begged me to stop. I ignored them all. I studied the scrambled cube for a few moments, memorizing every position. Then I closed my eyes and started turning. My hands moved fast. When I stopped and raised the cube, the hall went dead silent. Solved. Again. Even faster than Banbu could process what happened. Banbu looked like he might collapse. Shen Luoyan's eyes nearly popped out of her head. I opened my eyes and smiled at Banbu, telling him he'd obviously stolen this idea from our dynasty's ancient texts, but only learned the basics. He couldn't argue. I just solved his own invention blindfolded, faster than he could do it with his eyes open. General Shao roared with laughter and mocked Banbu for trying to test the master with the students' homework. The whole court joined in. The third prince and his faction forced painful smiles while dying inside. I'd just earned a massive achievement they couldn't take away. Banbu honored the bet. He removed his precious knife, the one gifted by the Northern King himself, and ordered his entire delegation to surrender their weapons. My father called for Banbu's blade, inspected it dismissively, then handed it directly to me as a gift. I was thrilled. That knife wasn't just a weapon. It was Banbu's personal symbol. At the northern border, it could serve as proof of authority or a bargaining chip. My father had no idea how useful this gift would be for my real plans. Then came the best part. The court announcer called for the formal greeting, and Banbu, the man who'd refused to bow when he walked in, dropped to his knees before my father with his entire delegation. Full kneeling ceremony, our dynasty's customs. The hall that had nearly ended in humiliation now witnessed complete submission. But I wasn't entirely happy. I'd shown too much today. Both the third prince and the northern envoy now had extra reasons to want me dead before I reached the border. I needed to start planning my next moves carefully. Banbu and his delegation knelt before my father with their teeth clenched. My father savored every second of it. 5 years of humiliation, finally repaid. He deliberately waited before telling them to rise. The banquet atmosphere completely flipped. Our side was celebrating while the northern envoy sat in misery. Officials who'd never spoken to me came over to toast me one after another. For one night, the useless sixth prince was a national hero. My father got so happy he drank too much and passed out early, which meant no private meeting with me. Fine by me, less scrutiny. I took Shen Luoyan home, but my real goal was talking to Yizi. Shen Luoyan rushed inside to tell her mother everything. Lady Shun was skeptical at first, then impressed when she heard about the blindfolded solve, but still cautious about the territory promise. She said her late husband always warned that the Northerners were wolves. They don't spit out what they've swallowed. Written agreements meant nothing. Only soldiers on the ground meant real recovery. Smart woman. She was right. Meanwhile, I went to the back garden with Yizi and got straight to the point. Work for me. She smiled and said I was being awfully direct. I told her smart people don't need small talk. She said she needed to decide if my ship was worth boarding. I told her bluntly she had no choice. She could either join me or report me to the emperor for treason. And we both knew nobody would believe her if she tried. She sighed and accepted. I gave her 2 missions. First, spread rumors that I was secretly allied with the former crown prince and plotting with the northern kingdom to overthrow the dynasty. It sounded insane, but that was the whole point. Nobody believed I could rebel, so when these rumors spread, everyone would assume another prince was smearing me. It would make my rivals look petty and desperate. Second, I told her to carve a stone figure with a prophecy on it and bury it somewhere it would be easily discovered. The inscription, "When the 6th sun goes north, the emperor and his court will climb the mountain." It was vague and ominous enough to make people talk, and impossible to trace back to me. Just another piece on the board, quietly shifting the game in my favor while everyone still thought I was a fool headed to his death. That same night, the third prince made his move. He had someone shoot a letter into Banbu's quarters with a detailed plan to destroy me. The letter explained that I was heading to the northern border to boost our army's morale, and that whether I lived or died there, it would be bad for their kingdom. The third prince was asking the enemy to help kill me, his own brother. Then he killed the messenger to leave no trace. Dead men don't talk. Banbu read the letter and laughed at how our people were better at backstabbing each other than governing. But he kept the letter instead of burning it, figured it might be useful as leverage later. He agreed to cooperate. We had a common enemy now, he thought. The next morning, I was summoned to attend the formal court assembly, my first one ever. It was still dark outside. I grumbled the whole way. Just give me whatever reward and let me sleep. Outside the hall, everything was different from before. Officials who'd never looked at me were suddenly crowding around, congratulating me, wanting to drink with me. General Shao slapped my shoulder again. I swear this old man was trying to cripple me, and declared he'd rip apart anyone who called me useless again. I smiled and thanked them while internally screaming for everyone to leave me alone. All this attention was dangerous. The more people gathered around me, the bigger the target on my back. The third prince and Duke Su watched from the side with murder in their eyes and smiles on their lips. They had their trap already set and were just waiting. Court began. My father asked where I was. I'd hidden in the back corner because I genuinely didn't know where to stand. I'd never attended a formal session before. Everyone laughed. Then my father dropped a bomb. He wanted to name me King of the North, Jinbei Wang. The whole court exploded. In our dynasty, only the emperor's brothers received the title of king, and only after a new emperor took the throne. No sitting emperor had ever made his own son a king. Even I thought it was too much. Every official protested. Even the ones who'd been friendly minutes ago objected. It broke centuries of tradition. My father pushed back, asking if recovering lost territory without a single soldier's death wasn't worthy of such an honor. He challenged anyone who could match that feat to step forward and claim the same reward. The court went quiet when my father challenged them. Then Duke Su spoke up with a reasonable point. The territory hadn't actually been returned yet. It was just a verbal promise. Any reward should wait until it was confirmed. Everyone agreed, and honestly, so did I. Then I muttered under my breath that maybe my father was still drunk from last night. The whole hall heard it. My father glared at me and asked what I'd said. I pretended I'd dozed off and was talking in my sleep. He told me to go home if I was tired. I actually started walking out. He had to shout at me to stop. He couldn't believe I was really leaving before getting my reward. That little performance did the trick. My father dropped the king title idea and moved on. I didn't want to be made a king right now. It would paint an enormous target on me. Save it for when I'm safely at the border with an army. Turns out the whole king proposal was a test anyway. My father had already prepared the real decree beforehand. He was testing which officials supported or opposed the idea, probably because those rumors EZ spread were already reaching him. Clever old man. I needed to be more careful. His intelligence network was faster than I expected. The actual rewards were excellent. 10,000 taels of gold, jade, silk, and various treasures worth about 15,000 gold in total. More funds for my military plans. Then my father asked the court about the grain negotiations with the Northern Kingdom. The fourth prince suggested trading extra grain in exchange for a signed agreement returning our territory. The third prince gave a longer speech about calling it trade instead of tribute to save face, plus getting war horses and other scarce goods in return. My father was clearly impressed with him. When he questioned the second and fifth princes, they had nothing new to add since the third and fourth had covered everything. He skipped me entirely, went straight to the elder ministers. Everyone understood. My father didn't consider me leadership material. Solving a puzzle was luck. Governing required real ability. Fine with me. Let them fight over the crown. I just needed military power. Whoever became emperor would still have to answer to the man controlling the army. The wedding date was set for the end of the month, about 10 days away. Then a eunuch chased me down outside to remind me I was required at tomorrow's session too. My face dropped. More court sessions? I just wanted my sleep back. What worried me more was why my father kept pulling me into court business. Was he reconsidering sending me north? If he tried to keep me in the capital, I'd have to escalate things dramatically. Don't force my hand, old man. Back home, I pretended to nap, but was actually thinking through my plans. The imperial rewards arrived, piles of gold, jade, silk, and other valuables. I tipped the delivery people generously and told my steward to buy everyone in the household new clothes for the wedding. Small gestures to build goodwill, though I was certain the steward was one of my father's spies. Shen Luoyan and Yizi showed up in the afternoon. Lady Shen had sent Yizi to help with wedding preparations, except I knew Yizi had engineered that herself. Now she had a legitimate reason to be at my mansion whenever she wanted. Smart move. Shen Lian's attitude toward me had shifted slightly after the banquet, but she still thought I was useless in any practical sense. I invited them both to come shopping with me. I also brought along some housewarming gifts to sell. Shen Luoyan gave me a look of disbelief that I was already selling things when my father had just given me 10,000 gold. I explained that expenses were piling up and asked Yizi to handle selling the rest of my gift collection privately. She agreed. Now I had a trusted person managing my finances without raising suspicion. While we were walking through the market, I heard the clanging of hammers from a blacksmith shop. I immediately steered everyone toward it. Shen Luoyan asked why. I said I needed a weapon for the battlefield. She scoffed and said I couldn't swing a blade if my life depended on it, which technically it would. But weapons weren't my real reason. I wanted to assess the skill level of local blacksmiths because I had something specific in mind, Damascus steel. If I could teach these smiths the technique, I could equip my future soldiers with weapons that would cut through anything the enemy carried. The problem was that Damascus steel is incredibly hard to work with. It would take enormous manpower to produce enough for an army. But first things first. We walked into the shop. Several muscular smiths were hammering farm tools. By the bellows, a one-armed man was pumping air into the furnace. Gao he froze and shouted in shock. "Commander Du!" Gao he recognized the one-armed man pumping the bellows. Du Guiyuan, former commander of the Blood Code Army. I'd never heard of them, and Shin Luoyan looked at me like I was an idiot for not knowing. Yi Zi explained. The Blood Code Army was the most elite unit in the entire Northern Army, fewer than 500 men selected from 200,000 soldiers. They fought so fiercely they were always drenched in blood after battle. 5 years ago, in the same war that killed Shin Luoyan's father, the Blood Code Army was nearly wiped out. They never reformed. This was basically a special forces commander working as a blacksmith's helper. I asked why. Turns out the pension money for his fallen soldiers had been stolen by corrupt officials. Du Guiyuan gave away every coin of his own rewards to the families of his dead brothers, leaving himself with nothing. I told him straight, "Come with me to the northern border." He refused, saying he'd lost his arm and his courage in that battle 5 years ago. So I tried a different approach. I told him I'd spoken with Yi Zi the night before and asked how she felt about her husband dying in the north without her seeing him one last time. Then I recited a poem I attributed to her. Green mountains everywhere can bury loyal bones. Why must a hero's body return wrapped in leather that hit everyone hard? Shin Luoyan stared at her sister-in-law with admiration, thinking Yi Zi had written those powerful words. Yi Zi shot me a knowing look. She understood I'd written it myself and was giving her the credit. Du Guiyuan repeated the line over and over, eyes growing wet. Those words were for his brothers who never came home. He dropped to his knees and swore to follow me north. Even if it meant dying on the battlefield, at least he'd die like a soldier instead of fading away in a blacksmith shop. I helped him up and handed over every silver note I had, several thousand taels. I told him it was compensation from the emperor for his fallen men. He tried to refuse, but I pushed the money into his hands. The government had failed those families. Someone had to make it right. I told him to settle his affairs and come find me at my mansion. Then I ordered the blacksmiths to forge me a sword modeled after Gao He's blade, and we left. I'd come looking for steel quality and walked out with a special forces commander. Not a bad afternoon. On the way home, Shin Luoyan actually smiled at me for the first time. She said maybe I wasn't completely without good qualities. I told her I didn't want soldiers who bled for our country to be forgotten. I said I'd report the stolen pension money to my father at tomorrow's court session. Gao He spoke up against it, warned that exposing corruption would make me powerful enemies. That was interesting. He was genuinely looking out for me now. Those warhorses were paying off. Yi Zi agreed it was risky. I pretended to reconsider, but my real plan was to tell my father privately. Going public would be stupid, but there was someone I could trick into doing it for me. When I got home, the third prince was sitting in my hall like he owned the place. He'd come to collect the 13,000 taels I borrowed at the banquet, as if I was ever going to pay that back. I completely ignored the debt and told him I had something urgent. I explained about Du Guiyuan and the stolen pensions, then sighed and said everyone warned me I was too weak to make enemies by reporting it. Could he please raise it at court tomorrow instead? His face turned green. He instantly understood the trap. If he reported it, he'd anger every corrupt official involved, possibly including people in his own faction. But if he stayed silent and I told my father later that I'd already informed the third prince, my father would be furious at him for covering it up. He bolted from my mansion without even saying goodbye, completely forgetting about his money. Ran straight to Duke Su's estate to figure out a plan. Turns out I was right to suspect Duke Su. As head of the finance ministry, he was probably the biggest thief of all. The third prince was horrified when he realized his own uncle had been stealing from dead soldiers' families. Duke Su brushed it off, saying he'd just use scapegoats if an investigation happened. They decided to report it themselves to win the emperor's approval, but only after Duke Su cleaned up his trail first. Meanwhile, they were still counting on Banbu and the northern envoy to execute whatever trap they'd laid for me. Duke Su assured the third prince that Banbu was already moving. This time, they said, I was dead for certain. They kept saying that. I kept not dying. That night, a lot of things hit my father at once. First, his shadow guards confirmed I'd told the third prince about the stolen pensions, and he was watching to see how the third prince would handle it. Then the rumors Yi Zi had spread reached him. Whispers that I was secretly a crown prince loyalist plotting with the northern kingdom. My father knew these were smear campaigns by other princes trying to destroy me, and he was furious at how desperately they wanted me gone. Then came the stone figure Yi had buried. Someone dug it up in the south of the city, carved with the words, "When the sixth sun goes north, the emperor and his court will climb the mountain." The shadow guard was so terrified to read those words aloud that my father had to threaten him with treason charges before he'd speak. And then, the real bombshell. Mu Shun rushed in with a letter found on a Northern Envoy member who'd been caught sneaking out of their quarters at night. City patrol soldiers died capturing him. The letter was taken from his body. My father exploded. He swept everything off his desk and roared that tomorrow's court session would start half an hour early. I got woken up in the middle of the night by the announcement. I figured it was about the pension scandal. I had no idea what was actually coming. At court the next morning, my father made everyone kneel for an entire cup of tea's time without saying a word. Old ministers nearly collapsed. The tension was suffocating. Duke Su and the third prince exchanged knowing smiles. They were certain their trap had worked. Finally, my father spoke. His voice was ice cold. "Number 6. Get out here." I froze. What? This was aimed at me? I walked out from my corner. My father held up a letter and explained. Last night, a member of the Northern Envoy was caught sneaking through the city. Our soldiers died stopping him. This letter was found on his body. He ordered Mu Shun to read it aloud to the entire court. I had no idea what was in that letter, but from the murderous look in my father's eyes, someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to frame me. Mu Shun read the letter aloud. It was supposedly from Banbu to me, thanking me for our cooperation at the banquet, claiming the whole Rubik's Cube challenge was a performance we'd rehearsed together. It said that during today's grain negotiations, I should help the Northern Kingdom get favorable terms, and they'd reward me handsomely. The court erupted. Suddenly everyone understood. Of course, the useless sixth prince couldn't have solved that puzzle on his own. It was all staged. The territory deal was fake. I'd been secretly working with the enemy all along, and my request to go north was really a plan to betray the dynasty from the inside. General Xiao was the only one who stood up for me. He argued this was obviously a frame job. I'd lived in the palace my whole life with zero outside contacts. How could I have conspired with foreigners? But Duke Su and his allies had prepared their arguments well. They said the Northern Kingdom could have sent agents ahead of the official delegation to recruit me after learning I wanted to go north. Most of the court agreed. My father asked if I had anything to say. I shook my head and said I couldn't prove my innocence. General Xiao reminded me about the ancient book I'd claimed to learn the puzzle from. If I could produce it, that would clear my name. But of course I couldn't. I'd made up that story. The book didn't exist. The third prince delivered the killing blow with perfect acting. He said with fake sorrow that I must have resented our father for years of neglect, and that resentment drove me to betray my country. Motive, evidence, and no defense. A perfect death trap. I asked my father for a cup of poison, but I was gambling. I'd already had Yi spread those rumors about me being a traitor. Rumors so absurd that my father's intelligence network would have traced them back to a smear campaign by rival princes. I'd also planted the stone prophecy. My father had heard all of it last night. If he was smart, and he was, he'd realize this letter was just another attack on me, timed perfectly to match those rumors. Someone was trying very hard to destroy me, and the coordination was too obvious. Duke Su called for my execution. Nearly every official echoed him, demanding my death. My father scanned the room in silence, and I caught a flash of killing intent in his eyes, but it wasn't directed at me. The officials all demanded my death, but my father stayed silent. General Xiao made one last stand. He knelt and begged for a proper investigation before any execution. I was grateful. This old soldier barely knew me, yet he was risking his reputation to save my life. My father agreed. He said no prince would be killed over a single letter without a full investigation. Duke Su tried to have me locked up immediately, but my father waved him off, said he wasn't worried about me running. That told me everything. My father was playing along. He'd already heard the rumors Yi spread and the stone prophecy. He knew someone was orchestrating a campaign against me. This whole court scene was his way of flushing out whoever was behind it. If he truly believed I was a traitor, I'd already be in chains. He also glanced at the third prince, clearly waiting for him to bring up the pension scandal. The third prince said nothing. My father noticed. Then the Northern Envoy was summoned in. My father ordered nobody to mention the letter. He wanted to observe how Banbu would act if he thought the frame job was still a secret. Banbu opened negotiations by demanding 3 million dan of grain. The court exploded. That was over a third of our annual tax revenue. Banbu casually mentioned he'd heard our harvest this year exceeded 30 million dan. Everyone's eyes snapped to me. That kind of information was classified. How did Banbu know the exact number? It made me look even more guilty of leaking secrets. I stayed quiet. Whoever designed this trap was brilliant. Banbu didn't look at me, didn't signal me, didn't ask for my help. And that silence was more damning than any accusation. It made the cooperation seem professional and practiced. My father flatly refused. He offered 50,000 dan maximum and told Banbu to trade war horses for more. Banbu then threatened us with 60,000 cavalry, reminding everyone that the northern kingdom's mounted army dwarfed ours. My father stood firm and said if they wanted war, we'd fight. Then Banbu smiled and proposed a gradual approach. Start with 2 dan on day 1, 4 on day 2, 8 on day 3, doubling every day for 1 month. I recognized it instantly. The wheat and chessboard problem. Doubling for 30 days would produce an astronomical number, far more than 3 million dan. Far more than our entire kingdom could produce in 100 years. Banbu was trying to trick my father with math. Just as I expected, Banbu was using the classic doubling trick. Everyone in court started calculating and concluded it seemed like a good deal. Surely just a few 100,000 dan total. The third prince jumped in to endorse it, and Duke Su agreed. Most officials followed. But old Elder Zhang, the scholar who'd been my father's tutor, suddenly shouted that it was a trap. He swore on his life the total would exceed 5 million dan. The third prince laughed at him, saying the old man couldn't count anymore. But my father trusted Zhang. He'd been a renowned academic for decades, and he was staking his life on this calculation. My father called out Banbu for trying to cheat us. Banbu pretended to be embarrassed, then smoothly pivoted. Fine, he'd trade 5,000 war horses for the grain instead. Everyone's eyes lit up. Horses were incredibly scarce for us. The bargaining shifted entirely to the number of horses. They haggled back and forth until they nearly settled on 8,000 horses. Nobody was paying attention to the grain amount anymore. That was Banbu's real trick. He'd shifted the entire conversation away from the astronomical grain cost and onto horses, making everyone feel like they were winning a negotiation. Brilliant and dangerous. I stepped forward. The third prince and fourth prince both tried to shut me down, reminded me I was still accused of treason. But my father silenced them and said he wanted to hear what I had to say. I challenged Banbu to another bet. I told him I could calculate the exact amount of grain due on the 30th day. Banbu was confident nobody could do that math quickly. It would take hours, even for a genius. He asked what I'd wager. I offered my head again. Banbu laughed and said my head wasn't worth 10,000 horses. Fair point, I said. So I pointed at the third prince and grinned. Then let's throw in my third brother's head too. When I pointed at the third prince, his face turned green. He screamed that I was trying to drag him to death with me. The other princes loved it. The second, fourth, and fifth all encouraged him to be brave and offer his head like I did. They'd be thrilled if he died. The third prince begged our father to stop me, and my father shut everyone up. I laughed and said I was joking. For my real stakes, I offered my head plus the full 300 million dan of grain Banbu originally demanded. The court went insane. They thought I was giving away the kingdom's food supply to the enemy. But my father overruled them all. He said he was willing to spend 300 million dan to get a definitive answer. He wanted to know the truth about me once and for all. He had the bet written into a formal contract and stamped it with the imperial seal. Banbu stamped his side too. Banbu asked me to state my answer. I stood tall and said, on the 30th day alone, the amount would be 1,073,741,820 dan. I'd memorized 2 to the 30th power in my previous life. The number was burned into my brain. The court erupted into hysteria. Over 1 billion? Officials wept. Some threatened to kill themselves. The third prince wailed that I was a traitor deliberately destroying the nation. Everyone was convinced I'd made up an absurd number to lose on purpose and hand Banbu 300 million dan of grain. Banbu smiled and declared I was wrong. Even my father's gaze turned cold. I didn't flinch. I asked for paper and began calculating publicly using Arabic numerals, which nobody in this world had ever seen. I explained they came from that fictional ancient book. The doubling sequence was simple math. I just kept multiplying. Banbu watched the numbers grow on the page and started sweating. He'd been counting on nobody being able to verify the calculation, but these foreign digits made it fast and clear. Before I even finished, Banbu cracked. He coughed and announced he'd misremembered. My number was correct after all. He admitted defeat. The hall went dead silent. Over 1 billion Dan on just the 30th day. The total for the full month would be beyond imagination. Banbu's gradual proposal would have bankrupted our entire civilization. And I'd just exposed it in front of everyone, proving I wasn't working with the enemy. I was the only person who could fight him. Banbu admitted defeat, and the court exploded. People couldn't believe the numbers. Just the 30th day alone required over 1 billion Dan, more grain than the entire empire produced in a year. The full month's total would be beyond comprehension. If my father had signed that agreement, the dynasty would have been destroyed without a single arrow fired. Banbu tried one last move. He praised my brilliance loudly, calling me the greatest talent in the dynasty. It sounded like a compliment, but I recognized it instantly. He was painting a target on me, making every prince and official jealous and afraid of me. Classic strategy, kill with praise. I deflected by insisting I'd just read it in an old book years ago and happened to remember the number. The third prince screamed at me for not speaking up sooner, while the whole court nearly got tricked. I calmly explained that with something this important, I needed to verify my memory several times before opening my mouth. Nobody could argue with that. Then Banbu did something I didn't expect. He pulled out the letter that the third prince had secretly sent him, the one plotting my death. He handed it to my father, saying he'd originally planned to deliver it later but saw no reason to wait. His scheme against me had failed, so now the letter was more useful as a tool to create chaos inside our court. The third prince's eyes nearly popped out, but Duke Su kept calm and signaled him not to worry. They'd already eliminated every trace connecting them to that letter. My father read it, then ordered the hall doors sealed and lamps lit. Everyone's face went white. He stood and asked in a voice like ice, "Who was it that swore to bash his head against these pillars if I didn't execute my son?" General Shao helpfully pointed at Vice Minister Yang. The man collapsed to the floor, begging for mercy. My father asked the court whether I deserved to die. Every single person, including the third prince and Duke Su, said no. Of course not. I'd just saved the empire from a devastating trap. My father nodded and turned to Yang with a cold smile. The entire court says my son shouldn't die, so I won't kill him. But you swore to die if I didn't. I'm granting your request. You may go ahead and bash your head against the pillar now. Yang tried desperately to beg for mercy, looking to Duke Su and the third prince for help. They pretended not to see him. My father gave Yang a choice: die honorably by keeping his word, or be executed as a traitor. Yang finally staggered to a pillar and smashed his head against it. Blood splattered across the hall. My father didn't even order the body cleaned up. Then he had Mu Shun read aloud the letter Banbu had handed over, the one plotting my death and asking the Northern Kingdom to cooperate. Every detail of the scheme was laid out, the analysis of why I had to die, and the exact plan to frame me. My father turned to me and asked if I had anything to say. I shrugged and said I was honored someone thought I was worth this much effort. Then my father revealed the rumors. He told the court that since yesterday morning, someone had been spreading stories that I was the Crown Prince's secret ally, that I'd been hiding my true nature for years, and that my trip north was really about seizing military power to rebel. The timing was obvious. The day after I'd recovered lost territory for the Empire, someone was already trying to destroy me. The third prince immediately glared at the second, fourth, and fifth princes, assuming they'd spread those rumors. He didn't know it was actually my work through Yizi. The other three princes glared right back and pointed their fingers at him. They had evidence too. Dozens of witnesses heard him threaten to kill me at the banquet. What followed was the most beautiful dogfight I'd ever seen. For princes screaming accusations at each other in front of the entire court while my father watched silently. I stood in my corner trying not to laugh. This was exactly what I planned. Let them tear each other apart while I slipped away to the border untouched. My father finally spoke. He casually asked someone to bring the four princes tea, as if they were having a pleasant chat. That terrified them more than any shout. They dropped to their knees begging forgiveness. Then my father walked down from his throne, kicked all four of them to the ground one by one, and finally unleashed his fury. He roared the words from the stone prophecy I'd had Yizi plant. When the sixth sun goes north, the emperor and his court will climb the mountain. He screamed at them. Tell me, which mountain are you planning to send me and my entire court to? Should I go ahead and relocate the imperial tombs? The message was devastating. Climbing the mountain meant being driven from power or buried. My father was telling them he knew someone was trying to use me as a pawn to overthrow the throne, and he suspected his own sons were behind it. Every prince in that room was shaking, and I was the one who'd planted that prophecy. My father's rage was real, but it was aimed exactly where I wanted it, at my brothers, not at me. My father completely lost it. He beat all 4 princes right there in the hall, punching and kicking them in front of the entire court. Nobody had ever seen the emperor act like this. The 4 of them didn't dare make a sound. I kept my head down, trying desperately not to laugh. I had to thank whoever conspired with Bamboo to frame me. Without that letter, my father would never have been angry enough to humiliate his own sons publicly. After Mu Shun calmed him down, my father declared something monumental. He looked at me and then at the 4 princes and announced plainly, I would never be made crown prince. Not because I lacked talent, but because my mother was a low-born palace maid. If I inherited the throne, the dynasty would collapse from internal power struggles. He said this directly, holding nothing back. It was a warning to my brothers, stop trying to destroy me, because I'm not your competition. I played the sad, understanding son and said I accepted my fate. Inside, I couldn't care less. I didn't want the throne. I wanted military power, which was worth more than any crown. Then my father ordered the other 3 princes to stand while the 3rd prince stayed kneeling. He demanded to know why the 3rd prince hadn't reported the stolen pensions. Duke Su jumped in with a rehearsed excuse. They'd planned to report it after the grain negotiations to avoid embarrassment in front of the foreigners. My father's expression softened slightly, but he was still furious. He ordered General Xiao and the Justice Ministry to jointly investigate the pension theft. Anyone involved, no matter how powerful, would be punished by law. He put General Xiao in charge specifically because he knew the old soldier would show no mercy. Duke Su was fined a year's salary. The 3rd prince was sentenced to kneel in the imperial ancestral temple for 3 days. Then my father turned to me and asked if I suspected the 3rd prince was behind the plot against me. I scratched my head and admitted yes. He said he'd give me permission to slap the 3rd prince twice across the face, right now, in front of everyone. The 3rd prince screamed that he was innocent. My father told him to shut up. I hesitated, not from fear, but because I had a better idea. I said my arms were too weak for a proper slap. Could I kick the 3rd prince between the legs twice instead? The whole court burst out laughing. The 3rd prince nearly exploded. But I understood what my father was really doing. He wanted to end the feud between us. The slap offer meant, settle your grudge here and now, then move on. My father laughed too and said the 3rd prince couldn't handle another attack like that. Instead, he ordered the 3rd prince to prepare an expensive wedding gift for me. If the gift wasn't generous enough, my father would deliver those slaps himself. The 3rd prince quickly agreed with a painful smile. Then my father declared it was over. He warned everyone, the 4 princes and their factions, that he knew exactly who was behind the schemes against me. This was a first and final warning. Next time, there would be no mercy. The best part, he excused me from all future court sessions. I nearly cheered. Elder Zhang objected, saying they needed me to counter Bamboo's tricks during negotiations. My father shut him down. He said the court should learn to be vigilant on their own instead of depending on me. My father announced he'd save up my rewards and give them all at once during my wedding. Then I brought up the Damascus steel idea, saying I'd read about a superior steel forging method in that ancient book. Before I could even finish, he waved me off and told me to just do whatever I wanted without bothering him. Then came the real prize. He said if anyone besides him ever accused me of rebellion again, I had his personal permission to hit them. If they had a problem with it, they could take it up with him. This was essentially an imperial shield, a verbal sort of authority. Nobody could use the treason accusation against me ever again. I was overjoyed. If anyone annoyed me in the future, I just had to provoke them into calling me a traitor, then beat them senseless with full imperial backing. On my way out, Elder Zhang caught up, wanting to learn the Arabic numeral system. I told him I'd prepare a document for my father first. Then General Xiao found me. He thanked me for winning 10,000 warhorses for the army and warned me to watch out for assassination attempts from Bamboo. He was heading off to investigate the pension theft. 2 powerful allies gained in 2 days, the empire's top scholar and its fiercest general. Not bad for a so-called waste of a prince. Back home, I got great news. Du Guiyuan had arrived and brought 2 former Bloodcoat army brothers with him, Zuoren and Yu Shizhong, among the few survivors still in fighting shape. I had them spar with Gao He and Zhou Mi. My 2 guards lost badly. Perfect. Now I had real fighters for my personal protection, and Gao He and Zhou could manage household security instead. I told them about my father ordering an investigation into the stolen pensions. They were thrilled and thanked me, thinking I'd personally reported it. I didn't correct them. Free loyalty points. Yizi had already sold every single gift, all of them, in one morning, to a merchant she knew. 15,000 taels of silver, clean. We'd actually planned this in advance. In front of the steward, she pretended she'd misunderstood my instructions, and I pretended to be annoyed. If anyone got suspicious, they'd just think Yizi was getting revenge on me for Shen Luoyan's sake. The real story stayed hidden. Then I told the steward to have Gao He help by the blacksmith shop, where I'd found Du Guyuan. Under Du Guyuan's name, not mine. This was a deliberate test. I'd already told my father about the steel project, so I was covered. But the steward, almost certainly my father's spy, would see me secretly acquiring property under someone else's name and report it as suspicious activity. If Gao He also reported it, I'd know he was still my father's man. If he stayed quiet, it meant he was choosing my side. Yizi saw through the whole thing immediately and called me devious. She was right. I couldn't help myself. I told her I wished my father had matched me with her instead of Shen Luoyan. She blushed and scolded me. I asked if she'd ever considered remarrying after all these years as a widow. She reminded me sharply that she held the title of fourth-rank Lady of Honor, personally bestowed by the emperor. Noble widows with imperial titles weren't allowed to remarry, and any man caught having an affair with one would be executed. I joked that if my rebellion succeeded, the first thing I'd do was cancel her title. She glared at me and stormed out, calling me shameless and devious behind my back. She wasn't wrong, but I needed her sharp mind more than I needed her approval. And somewhere under all that outrage, I could tell she was starting to enjoy working for someone who actually had a plan. After lunch, Gao He pulled me aside. He told me I should say the blacksmith shop was a gift for Du Guyuan, not something I bought for myself. He warned that my father might think I was plotting rebellion if he heard I was secretly acquiring property under someone else's name. That was exactly the reaction I wanted. I dropped the act and asked him directly, "You're one of my father's spies, aren't you? And so is the steward?" He froze. I explained how I'd only told the third prince about the pension theft, and the third prince had hidden it. Yet my father still found out. The only way that happened was through people watching me from inside my own household. I told Gao he was smart, and I appreciated that he'd try to warn me. I asked him to think carefully about where his loyalty truly lay, and I walked away. The blacksmith shop test had worked perfectly. Gao He had chosen to protect me over reporting me. The steward, on the other hand, would almost certainly run to my father's people. Now I knew who was who. At the blacksmith shop, I started teaching the smiths how to forge Damascus steel. Without modern equipment, I focused on the twisted Damascus method, the most feasible with hand tools. It was frustrating, slow work, with problems at every step. By nightfall, we'd barely produced one crude steel billet, but it was a start. I had to leave because Elder Zhang had shown up at my mansion. The old scholar had been trying all day to replicate the calculations I'd done at court and couldn't figure out where he went wrong. He was so obsessed he hadn't eaten. I took him to my study, taught him multiplication tables and carrying digits, and within half an hour he was computing on his own. I just sat beside him correcting mistakes. Then my front door practically exploded. Shen Luoyan stormed in like a hurricane, kicked open the study door, and screamed at me. She'd heard about the rebellion rumors spreading through the city, and then discovered I'd bought a blacksmith shop to forge weapons. She was convinced I was about to get the treason charge pinned on me for real, and this time the Shen family would be dragged down with me. Before I could respond, Elder Zhang calmly told her to watch her words. The emperor had publicly declared today that anyone besides himself who accused me of rebellion would get slapped by me with full imperial permission. The look on Shen Luoyan's face was priceless. Shen Luoyan stood there with her mouth open. Elder Zhang cheerfully confirmed everything. My father had given me personal permission to hit anyone who accused me of treason, and I'd already told my father about the blacksmith shop. She'd worked herself into a fury over nothing. She deflated immediately. I waved her off and went back to helping Zhang with his calculations. The old scholar spent the next hour working through the doubling sequence, with me correcting his mistakes along the way. When he finally reached day 30 and the number matched mine exactly, over 1 billion, he was stunned all over again, even though he'd known the answer beforehand. He bowed to me with genuine respect and said this numbering system should be taught across the entire empire. Shen Luoyan watched the whole thing in disbelief. The most respected scholar in the dynasty was taking lessons from me like a student. Over dinner, Zhang couldn't stop talking. He told everyone at the table the full story of what happened at court. How I'd exposed Bamboo's trick, how my father beat 4 princes publicly, how I won 10,000 war horses. Du Guiyuan and his men crowded in to listen. By the end, Zhang had turned me into some kind of legendary hero. The old man should have been a storyteller instead of a minister. After dinner, I wrote up the Arabic numeral system and the multiplication table and gave them to Zhang to deliver to my father. No need for me to make the trip myself. Shen Luoyan was pale when she realized how close she'd come to disaster. If she'd actually reported my rebellion joke to the emperor, he would have assumed the Shen family was behind the smear campaign, and they'd all be dead. She looked at me with genuine fear for the first time, not of me, but of how easily I'd been playing a game she didn't even know existed. I reminded her she still owed me for that arm twisting. She had no comeback. Yizi quietly mentioned that Shun Lian's martial arts skills were better than anyone on my staff, including my blood code army fighters. That was her way of telling me not to push my future wife too far. Point taken. That night, Gao He came to me and confessed everything. He admitted he was my father's spy, confirmed the steward was too, and told me the steward had already reported the blacksmith shop purchase. That's why Gao He had tried to warn me earlier. He'd made his choice. I told him he hadn't disappointed me. From now on, he and Zhou would handle internal security and quietly watch for any other spies in the household. He understood perfectly. I finally had eyes I could trust inside my own home. Not having to attend court was bliss. I slept in, ate breakfast at my own pace, then spent the whole day at the blacksmith shop working on Damascus steel. Progress was painful. The twisted steel bars kept cracking during forging. I had to analyze every failure and adjust the process each time. I knew the theory from obsessively watching a forging competition show in my previous life, but doing it by hand without modern equipment was a completely different challenge. Then Gao He galloped in. My father was urgently summoning me to the palace. Great. I figured Bamboo had pulled another stunt. But instead of the court hall, the eunuch led me deep into the imperial gardens. I spotted some white birds in a pond and immediately thought about making quill pens. My handwriting with a brush was embarrassing, and I desperately needed a better writing tool. I found my father in a pavilion with Elder Zhang, drinking tea. My father was holding the paper I'd written last night with the number system. Before anything else, he slammed it on the table and roared about how terrible my handwriting was. A prince who writes worse than a toddler. Was I not ashamed? I knew exactly what he was doing. Classic emperor technique. Attack first to put me off balance, then ask what he really wants while I'm eager to please. Textbook manipulation. Old fox. After Zhang smoothed things over, my father got to the real point. He wanted everything I knew about mathematics written down for nationwide adoption. I'd get credit for it. He had writing materials brought over immediately. I stared at the brush and dreaded the humiliation of writing more chicken scratch in front of the emperor. So I mentioned that I normally used a different kind of pen and asked if someone could pluck a few long feathers from those geese in the pond. The room went dead silent. Zhang stared at me with a twitching face. The servants buried their heads, trembling with suppressed laughter. My father looked like he was debating whether to slap me or kick me. I had no idea what was happening. It's just geese. What's the big deal? I backed off and reached for the brush, apologizing for wanting to pluck his pet geese. My father finally exploded. Those aren't geese, you idiot. They're snow geese. Rare birds presented as tribute from a foreign kingdom, snow geese. Not regular geese. Rare birds gifted from a foreign kingdom. I just asked the emperor to pluck his exotic tribute animals so I could make a pen. Elder Zhang burst out laughing. My father glared at me, but eventually ordered someone to pull a few feathers anyway. He told me to get outside more often. If I'd said this in front of the whole court, he'd have died of embarrassment. The quill worked beautifully. My writing improved immediately compared to the brush. Zhang got excited and told my father this kind of pen could make education affordable for poor families who couldn't buy proper brushes and ink stones. My father dismissed it as a trivial trick, but I could tell he was secretly pleased his forgotten son kept producing useful things. I wrote down everything I could remember: exponents, functions, higher equations, with notes explaining each concept. I told my father I didn't fully understand it all myself, so nobody would expect me to be a walking encyclopedia. In truth, what I wrote would keep their scholars busy for years. When my father asked why I'd thought of using feathers as pens, I played the sympathy card. I said my brushes used to break or go missing in my old quarters, and I never dared ask for replacements. One day, I picked up a fallen feather and tried writing with it. My father went quiet for a long time, then sighed and said he'd neglected me. But that was it. No gifts, no compensation, not even lunch. My attempt at milking pity completely failed. Zhang took the math papers and rushed off to have his scholars study them. My father sent me to escort Zhang out without so much as a meal. I grumbled the whole way. Walking out, I asked Zhang how the grain negotiations ended. He said we'd give the North 300 million Dan in exchange for the 10,000 horses and the return of our territory. I pointed out that the horses and territory were already ours from the bets, so essentially we'd given away 300 million Dan for free. Zhang sighed and explained the political reality. We weren't strong enough to fight, and getting those concessions on paper was already a miracle. He was right. I couldn't change it. I needed to focus on getting to the border and building real power. When my carriage approached home, I saw a crowd gathered outside my gate. My heart jumped. Had someone come to cause trouble? I pushed through the crowd and froze. Standing at my door was Bamboo. Bamboo was standing outside my gate. The old schemer had come with just one bodyguard, knowing full well nobody would dare touch an official envoy. Du Guiyuan and his bloodcoat brothers were staring at Bamboo with murderous fury. This was the strategist whose tricks had destroyed their unit 5 years ago, but they couldn't lay a finger on him. Gao tried to stop me from letting him in, warning it could be another trap. I waved everyone aside. My father already knew Bamboo was a snake. He wouldn't fall for any more frame jobs. Inside, Bamboo got straight to business. He'd lost 3 bets to me and wanted one more match before leaving tomorrow. He pulled out a math problem. 100 horses eat 100 bundles of grass per day. Big horses eat 3 bundles each. Medium horses eat 2, and 2 foals share 1 bundle. How many of each type are there? I glanced at it and immediately saw the trap. 3 unknowns. Only 2 equations, meaning multiple valid answers. Bamboo was planning to reject whatever single answer I gave and claim I was wrong because I'd missed the other solutions. Classic trick. I handed the paper back and told my steward to show him out. Bamboo tried the, "Are you scared?" approach. I told him the problem was too easy to bother with, and besides, he had nothing worth betting. He'd already welched on previous bets that hadn't been delivered yet. What could he possibly offer? He searched his pockets and found nothing. I told him the only valuable thing on him was his head, but I couldn't take the head of a foreign envoy. He asked what it would take to make me accept the challenge. I thought about what Bamboo actually had that was worth betting. His delegation had over 300 people and 600 horses. 1 person, 2 horses each. Those had to be quality animals. I told him I'd bet for all 600 horses. My stake? My head again. Bamboo agreed eagerly. He was confident I'd fail this time. The problem looked simple but had multiple solutions. 3 unknowns with only 2 equations. He expected me to find one answer and miss the rest. Then he'd declare me wrong. Yeezy drafted the contract but hesitated to hand it over, begging me to reconsider. Everyone urged caution. I signed it without blinking and pressed my thumbprint. Bamboo signed his side, grinning. Then he got greedy. He asked to add Shen Luoyan as an extra stake. I refused immediately. I told him I'd never use a woman as a gambling chip, no matter how confident I was. It wasn't about courage, it was about principle. He pointed at Yeezy instead. I refused again. She was my sister-in-law, not property. Bamboo settled for 10,000 silver taels as an additional stake. I agreed, but added my own condition. If I won, he had to slap himself twice in public and perform the formal student-to-teacher bow to me. That would be the ultimate humiliation. The great northern strategist publicly admitting he'd learned everything from our dynasty. He hesitated, so I raised the pressure further. I offered to limit myself to 1 incense stick's worth of time. If I couldn't solve the problem before it burned out, I'd lose automatically. Bamboo's eyes lit up. He was certain 1 stick of incense wasn't enough to find all the answers. He agreed happily, but I added one more rule. While I solved the problem, he had to write down his own answers on separate paper. I didn't trust his integrity. He'd already tried to deny losing once before, and I wasn't going to give him room to change his answers after seeing mine. His face reddened, but he agreed. The incense was lit. The incense was lit. Bamboo hid in a corner writing his answers while his guard watched for peepers. I pulled out my quill pen and started working. I set up the equation, 3 unknowns, 2 constraints, and solved it systematically, substituting values from 1 to 20. Within minutes, I had 6 valid answers. The incense stick was barely half burned. I announced I was done. Bamboo was shocked at the speed, but grinned confidently, certain I'd only found one solution. He revealed his paper with a triumphant laugh. For answers. My household panicked. They assumed 4 was more than whatever I had, so I must have lost. Little Xian Sheng dropped to her knees crying, saying she'd die with me. Du Guiyuan and his men surrounded me with drawn weapons, ready to fight. Gao He pulled his sword. I stood up and told everyone to calm down. Nobody said I'd lost. Bamboo sneered and called me a sore loser. I'd written 6 answers to his 4, which obviously meant I'd made mistakes. His guard mocked me too. I told the guard that fools don't get to speak. Then I told Bamboo to actually verify my answers before celebrating. He'd made the problem himself, but apparently hadn't found all the solutions. He scoffed and started checking. He matched his 4 against mine, all present. Then he began calculating my 2 extra answers. His expression slowly changed. Sweat appeared on his forehead. The old strategist was realizing he'd brought a problem he hadn't fully solved himself, and I'd found answers he'd missed. Bamboo verified my 2 extra answers. Both correct. He slumped to the ground, muttering that it was impossible. He'd spent ages solving his own problem and found 4 answers. I found 6 in minutes. He hadn't even realized his own puzzle had more solutions than he thought. His guard tried to drag him away, threatening that anyone who stopped them would face northern cavalry. Du Guiyuan grabbed a sword with his one good arm and said anyone trying to leave without paying would answer to his blade first. Bamboo silenced his own guard. To his credit, the old man had real backbone under all that scheming. He said northern men honored their bets and wouldn't let their nation become a laughingstock. He took a deep breath, raised both hands, and slapped himself hard across the face, once on each cheek. The sound echoed through the courtyard. Then he dropped to his knees before me and knocked his head on the ground 3 times. The full student to master ceremony. Everyone watched in stunned silence. The great strategist of the northern kingdom, kneeling at the feet of the useless prince, I studied him as he knelt. This man could swallow humiliation like water and still function. That made him far more dangerous than someone who'd rage and lose control. If we ever fought a real war, he'd be a formidable enemy. I told him to remember. Every time he saw me in the future, he owed me the same bow. He stood, jaw clenched, and left without another word. His guard shot murderous looks at everyone. Outside, the guard asked if they really had to hand over 600 horses. Bamboo said they had no choice. If they broke this bet, the dynasty would never trust them to deliver the 10,000 horses or return the territory. They'd lose everything over 600 animals. He'd find a way to make us pay later. I sent Gao He and every available servant to go collect our new horses. 600 northern bred mounts. Even their worst animals were better than most of ours. This was a fortune on 4 legs, and I'd won it all with a quill pen and some algebra. While I was raiding the northern envoy stables, chaos was unfolding across the city. My steward had panicked and sent word to the palace that I'd lost a bet with Bamboo and was about to die. My father was in the middle of visiting his favorite consort when the news hit. He threw on his clothes and rushed out, ordering his carriage to my mansion. Then a city patrol guard caught up with a completely different report. I wasn't dying. I was storming the envoy's guest house to take their horses. My father was thoroughly confused. One minute his son was supposedly dead, the next he was robbing foreign diplomats. Meanwhile, the consort had already sent word to the 3rd prince to start scheming against me. Everyone assumed I was finished. They were all wrong. At the guest house, the staff tried to stop me, begging that they'd lose their heads if I caused an incident. I told them to get out of my way and ordered my people to take every horse in the stables. Didn't matter whose they were. We'd sort it out later. When the city patrol arrived and tried to call it robbery, I slapped the signed betting contract into the officer's hands. He read it, went pale, and quietly ordered his men to help us lead the horses away. Bamboo sat in his room refusing to watch. He'd ordered his own people not to interfere. To his credit, even in defeat, he upheld the bet. But the northern soldiers stood there grinding their teeth, watching 600 of their horses disappear into the night. I mounted one of the tall northern stallions, waved at the guest house, and called out that I wouldn't be seeing Bamboo off tomorrow. He stormed outside, still seething. Then I twisted the knife. I smiled and asked if he wanted to bet one more time. I had a great problem for him. His eyes lit up with rage, and he accepted. Then I asked what he had left to wager. His clothes? The man had literally nothing left to bet. He realized I'd baited him just to humiliate him one more time. The blood rushed to his head. He tried to hold it down, failed, and vomited a spray of blood right there in the courtyard. For bets. For losses. A public kneeling ceremony. 600 horses gone. And now coughing blood in front of his own delegation. The great northern strategist had met someone who played dirtier than he did. I rode home on my new horse, feeling pretty good about the evening. Bamboo's constitution wasn't as tough as his poker face. One little taunt, and he coughed up blood. I almost felt bad. Almost. We were leading the horses away when a long line of torches appeared, my father's imperial escort. Turns out my panicking steward had reported to the palace that I'd lost to Bamboo and was about to die. My father abandoned his evening with the consort and rushed out in a fury. He stormed out of his carriage demanding to know what I was doing robbing the northern envoy. I handed him the betting contract. He read it, and his anger melted the instant he realized I'd won again. He sent his guards to inspect the horses. The commander confirmed they were all quality war horses. Then my father did what emperors do best. He stole my prize. He ordered the city patrol to deliver all the horses to the imperial cavalry. When I protested that I'd won them fair and square, he asked what I planned to do with 600 war horses. Build a private army to rebel? I couldn't argue with that logic without sounding treasonous. I tried saying I wanted to sell them for wedding money. He exploded. Selling war horses was illegal for a prince. Every angle I tried, he blocked with perfectly reasonable objections. The man was robbing me in broad moonlight with airtight legal reasoning. He, generously, let me keep 20 horses out of 600. 20. Then he invited himself to my mansion for the evening, saying he'd stay the night to hear about the bet. When I asked if he wasn't going back to the palace, his face twisted into something terrifying, and he snarled, "Don't you dare mention the palace to me." I had no idea what that was about, but clearly something had gone very wrong in his evening plans before my steward's false alarm dragged him out. Whatever it was, my father was taking it out on me and my horses. Meanwhile, though I didn't know it yet, the third prince had received word from his mother that I was supposedly dead. He'd rushed to Duke Su's mansion, celebrating. They planned for him to arrive at my house first, shed fake tears over my corpse, and win my father's approval for being such a caring brother. They were in for quite a surprise. My father was in a fantastic mood after confiscating my horses. On the way to my mansion, he heard that I'd made Bamboo cough up blood and got even happier. He said I'd avenged his own humiliation from 5 years ago. He spent the whole ride trying to figure out what to reward me with. My contributions kept piling up, and he was running out of ideas. Official positions were off the table since he'd just exempted me from court. More gold felt inadequate for someone who'd recovered lost territory. At my gate, he complained that my lanterns looked cheap and ordered me to replace them with something more impressive. Inside, he noticed the steward, the spy who'd falsely reported my death and ruined his evening, and clearly wanted to kick him across the room. I could tell the steward's days in my household were numbered. My father wanted to hear the full story of the bet, so I suggested dinner first since I hadn't eaten. While the food was being prepared, he went to the front courtyard to speak privately with Du Guiyuan and his 2 men. I worried he might try to poach them, but when they came back, he'd simply promised to investigate the stolen pensions and told them to stay in my service. I exhaled with relief. Then the third prince arrived. He'd received his mother's message that I was dead and rushed over with fake tears ready. He saw servants changing the lanterns outside, which my father had ordered for decoration, and assumed they were hanging funeral whites. He burst through the front gate wailing, "Father, my deepest condolences." He thought my father was punishing my staff for failing to protect me. He thought Du Guiyuan's men were kneeling in shame. Everything he saw confirmed what he wanted to believe. He came stumbling in with crocodile tears streaming down his face, crying out for my father to stay strong in his grief. I wasn't dead. I was standing about 30 feet away, watching my brother mourn me with the worst acting I'd ever seen. The third prince came stumbling in, squeezing out fake tears, wailing for my father to stay strong and not grieve too much over my death. My father stared at him in complete disbelief. Mu Shun frantically tried to signal him to stop, but the idiot was too focused on his performance to notice. Then I walked out of the house. The third prince's voice died in his throat. He stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. The realization hit him. I was alive. The lanterns were being changed for decoration, and Du Guiyuan's men had been kneeling for a completely unrelated conversation. He'd just performed an elaborate mourning scene for a living person in front of the emperor. My father slapped him across the face so hard he saw stars. Then he roared, "Do you want your brother dead that badly?" The third prince, still not understanding, kept babbling about how death couldn't be reversed and my father should take care of his health. My father screamed back, "Your brother has risen from the dead. Should I call a priest to perform an exorcism?" I stood there biting the inside of my cheek, trying not to laugh. My father ordered the third prince to go kneel at the ancestral temple. Day and night this time, not just daytime. The third prince limped away, probably cursing Duke Su for the advice that led him here. Inside, my father was still fuming. He grabbed a wine jug and drank straight from it, then smashed it on the floor. Mu Shun tried to smooth things over by suggesting the third prince had simply heard wrong and came out of genuine concern. I made a mental note. Mu Shun defending the third prince was suspicious. Whose side was this eunuch really on? My father turned on the steward, the one who'd sent the false death report. He ordered 30 lashes and permanent removal from my household. I pretended to plead for mercy, but backed off the moment my father glared at me. Inside, I was celebrating. My father had just removed his own spy from my house, without me lifting a finger. After calming down, my father asked me to explain the whole bet with bamboo. I showed him the calculations and answers. He couldn't follow the math, but verified the solutions were correct. When I told him about bamboo slapping himself, kneeling before me in a student's bow, and then coughing blood from my final taunt, my father laughed harder than I'd ever seen him laugh. Then he asked what reward I wanted. That actually stumped me. What I really wanted was military authority, but I couldn't say that. Anything else felt pointless. For once, I genuinely didn't know what to ask for. I tossed the question back to my father, saying I hadn't expected any reward. He thought for a long time, then said something that hit me like a thunderbolt. He was granting me the right to privately recruit a personal guard force. Private soldiers. That was a privilege reserved for crown princes and kings. My heart raced, but alarm bells went off immediately. Was this a test? Was he trying to see if I'd grabbed too eagerly at military power? I shook my head and stammered that I couldn't possibly accept, that I didn't know anything about training soldiers. My father cut me off. "You're just afraid people will say you're rebelling, right?" He limited it to one company, 500 men. He said if I could overthrow the dynasty with 500 soldiers, he'd happily hand me the throne. He assigned Du Guiyuan and his 2 men to train. The unit ordered weapons and armor from the Ministry of Works, and warned me, recruit even one man over 500, and he'd forget he was my father. As he left, he said through the carriage curtain, "I'm not afraid of you rebelling. I know you can't. Figure out my real intention yourself." I watched his carriage disappear. Then the truth sank in and my stomach dropped. This wasn't generosity. This was my father's way of keeping me in the capital. Why would he give me a private guard if he still planned to send me north, where I'd already have 3,000 soldiers? 500 men in the capital was a consolation prize. It meant he was reconsidering sending me to the border at all. I'd performed too well. My achievements made him want to keep me close instead of letting me go where I actually needed to be. Yeezy came to congratulate me and found me miserable. I explained, 500 guards in the capital were worthless compared to 3,000 troops at the border and the freedom to build real power. She understood immediately and went quiet. I told her to start looking for a location nearby to house and train the soldiers. But my mind was already racing ahead to a bigger problem. I needed a plan to make my father send me north despite wanting to keep me. It was time to pull out the big moves. The next day, my father announced my private guard privilege at court. As expected, almost everyone objected. Private soldiers were only for crown princes and kings. My father overruled them all. The consort panicked and ran to Duke Su, worried my father was positioning me for the throne. But Duke Su laughed it off. He recognized what I'd already figured out. This was my father's way of keeping me in the capital. If he planned to send me north, why give me guards here? Duke Su was actually happy. With me stuck in the capital, they'd have plenty of time to deal with me later. I went to the military warehouse to collect weapons and armor. They'd prepared 500 sets of scale armor. Heavy iron plates over leather, 30+ pounds per suit, the same type the Imperial Guard wore. I told them to swap it all for light leather armor instead. Du Guiyuan and his men stared at me like I'd lost my mind. The warehouse officer was delighted. He was giving away cheaper goods. On the way back, I explained my thinking. Northern cavalry were terrifying precisely because they moved fast and struck where nobody expected. Their soldiers wore light armor because speed mattered more than protection. If I loaded my men down with heavy scale armor, they'd be slow and exhausted before any real fight began. Light armor meant mobility. Du Guiyuan suggested training with heavy armor first. then switching to light armor at the border for an advantage. Reasonable idea, but I shook my head. These would be raw recruits. We didn't have time for graduated training. I needed soldiers who could fight quickly, not men who spent months getting used to extra weight before learning anything useful. Speed training was the only option. I told them to recruit 497 men within 3 days, not 500. The 3 of them counted toward the total. I wasn't giving anyone a reason to accuse me of exceeding my quota by even a single soldier. My father heard I'd chosen leather over iron inside. He assumed I was being timid, too scared of treason accusations to accept proper equipment. He had no idea I was thinking about cavalry tactics on the northern plains, not palace politics. Let him misread me. That was safer than him understanding my real plans. The northern envoy left, and my wedding was approaching fast. I put Yi in charge as temporary steward. With the old spy gone, she could manage the household and keep searching for any remaining informants. Recruiting soldiers went to Du Guiyuan's team. I deliberately showed zero interest in the military side. The less enthusiasm I displayed, the less my father would worry. For 2 solid days, I lived at the blacksmith shop. We'd been failing over and over trying to forge Damascus steel. The twisted bars kept cracking during every attempt. But finally, on what felt like our 100th try, we successfully forged a spearhead without a single crack. When the quenching was done and we confirmed it was perfect, the whole shop erupted in cheers. I had them polish and sharpen it, then soaked it in vinegar to bring out the signature wavy pattern of Damascus steel. The smiths had never seen anything like it. They called it patterned steel and couldn't stop staring. The process was solved. Once we could scale production, our soldiers would carry weapons that could snap enemy blades in half. Shen Luoyin showed up at the shop looking for me. She'd gone to my mansion first and heard I'd been blacksmithing for days. She found me covered in soot and sweat, looking like a beggar. She mocked me for neglecting both the wedding preparations and the soldier recruitment in favor of banging metal. Then she spotted the spearhead in Gao He's hands. Her eyes went wide. She grabbed it and ran her fingers over the Damascus pattern like she was caressing a lover. This woman loved weapons more than people. She called it beautiful, but then smirked and said it was probably like me. Pretty on the outside, useless on the inside. A decorative pillow. That annoyed me. I had the spearhead clamped down and told Gao he to strike it full force with his sword. His blade snapped clean in half. The spearhead had barely a scratch. I looked at Shen Luoyin and said, not just good looking. Very hard too. Shen Luoyin felt something was off about what I said, but couldn't figure out what. She was too distracted by the spearhead anyway. Before I could blink, she'd snatched it and announced it was hers now. I asked if she even knew how to use a spear. She scoffed. Her father was famous for the Shun family spear technique, and she'd been swinging his 40-pound war spear since she was 13. This woman was genuinely strong, not just tough-talking. I promised to have the smiths forge her a complete spear made entirely of Damascus steel. Gao He and Zhou both wanted new weapons too, so I ordered blades for everyone. My people needed the best equipment I could give them. Back at the mansion, the Imperial Household Agency was busy decorating for the wedding. Yi was handling everything smoothly as temporary steward. Recruitment was going well too. Du Guiyuan had so many applicants that he was being picky, which was a good problem. Nobody believed I was actually going to fight, so joining my guard seemed like easy money with zero risk. Perfect, let them think that. Yi found a location for the training camp, an abandoned quarry at Kadir Mountain, about 20 miles south. It had old buildings that could be converted to barracks and enough open ground for drills and cavalry training. Not ideal distance from my mansion, but workable. I need to get my father's approval since it was government property. Then I learned something I hadn't known. Tomorrow was the anniversary of Shen Luoyin's father and brother's deaths, but not the date they actually fell in battle. Yi explained quietly that after they died fighting, the Northern King was so enraged by their attack on his capital that he ordered cavalry to trample their bodies into nothing. There were no remains to bury. The family could only bury empty clothes. So they marked the memorial day as when those clothes were laid to rest. I felt a stab of guilt for not knowing. These men had given everything, and even in death, they'd been desecrated. I told them I'd come to the memorial tomorrow. Shen Luoyin looked surprised. We weren't married yet, so I had no obligation. But they were going to be my family, and their enemies were going to be my enemies. The least I could do was stand at their graves. Someday, when I reached the north with an army, I'd settle this debt properly. That night, Shen Luoyin went to Yi's room with suspicions. She'd noticed something was off between me and her sister-in-law. Yizi followed my instructions too readily, more like a loyal subordinate than a temporary helper. Yizi deflected skillfully, teasing Shen Luoyan about being jealous. Shen Luoyan nearly hit the ceiling denying it. Yizi steered the conversation toward me being a decent husband. No arrogance, no cruelty, actually thoughtful. Shen Luoyan wasn't buying it. She admitted she'd stopped calling me useless since the whole city was celebrating my victories over Bamboo, but she still considered me a weakling. The only thing she respected was the Damascus steel. Then Shen Luoyan innocently repeated everything I'd said at the blacksmith shop, including my comment about my spear being not just good-looking, but very hard. Yizi's face turned bright red. She asked if Lady Shen had given her daughter the pre-wedding talk about intimacy between men and women yet. Shen Luoyan had no idea what she meant. After Yizi whispered certain explanations, I can only imagine what happened. Because the next morning when I arrived at the Shun estate for the memorial, Shen Luoyan looked at me with eyes that clearly wanted to carve me into pieces. She'd finally understood what I meant at the blacksmith shop. Some things can't be unheard. I pretended not to notice and focused on the task at hand. Lady Shen offered me a carriage, saying my riding was too poor. Her attitude had softened considerably since my victories, though she still thought I was an idiot in many ways. I declined the carriage and said I needed to practice riding since I was heading to the northern border soon. Then I casually added, loud enough for everyone around to hear, that my father had issued an official decree sending me north, and an emperor's word couldn't be taken back. Lady Shen nearly slapped me. She thought I was being dangerously stupid, broadcasting the existence of that decree when my father clearly wanted to keep me in the capital. But that was exactly my plan. My big move was to make the whole city talk about how the emperor had publicly ordered me to the border. Once enough people knew, my father would lose face if he reversed it. I was using public opinion to force his hand. Yizi rode in the carriage looking queasy. She'd figured out what I was doing, deliberately spreading the word to pressure my father. Playing with fire, she thought. She wasn't wrong. But staying in the capital was a death sentence for my ambitions. I needed the north, and I'd burn a few bridges to get there. We rode out to Big Point Mountain where the Shun family's empty graves stood, father and two sons, side by side, the sons slightly behind, as if following their father into one last battle. No bodies inside, just clothes. The northern king had their remains trampled into nothing after they died. Lady Shen knelt before her husband's grave, silently speaking to him. The whole family burned incense. When it was my turn, Lady Shen stopped me from kneeling. She said since Shen Luoyan and I weren't married yet, a bow was enough. I wasn't sure if she was being respectful or if she still didn't accept me as family. I stood before General Shen's tombstone, held my incense, and declared loudly that I was heading north soon and would take northern heads to avenge him, even if it cost my life. Lady Shen looked like she wanted to strangle me. I was doing it again, broadcasting my northern border plans to anyone within earshot. As I bowed for the first time and started my second bow, an arrow came screaming out of the tree lean straight at me. Everything happened in a flash. Gao He and Zhou Mi shouted warnings and dove toward me. But Shen Luoyan was faster. She yanked me behind her with one hand and caught the arrow out of the air with the other. Caught it. A flying arrow. With her bare hand. My jaw dropped. I'd been told she was skilled, but this was on another level entirely. In my old world, people joked about catching bullets. She'd basically done the ancient equivalent. Lady Shen charged into the forest like a woman half her age, faster than my trained guards. Even the eldest daughter-in-law followed. The Shun family servants fanned out searching for more assassins. Every single one of them moved like trained fighters. This entire household was a martial arts clan. No wonder Shen Luoyan looked down on me. They couldn't catch the assassin. The terrain was too dense. But they found signs of someone lying in wait. The attacker had known I'd be here today. Lady Shen examined the arrow. It was standard military issue from our own army. That pointed toward someone inside the dynasty, not a foreign agent. Yizi said it meant there was likely a spy in my household who'd leaked my schedule. Lady Shen scolded her for saying it openly, but we were all thinking the same thing. I sent Gao He racing to the palace with the arrow to report the assassination attempt to my father. Whoever ordered this had just made a serious mistake. Using a government arrow was sloppy, and my father would take an attempt on his son's life very personally. As for Shen Luoyan, I told her she was amazing and asked her to teach me martial arts. She scoffed and said I wasn't the type. But I was dead serious. This world's martial arts were far more powerful than I'd imagined. I was heading to a battlefield. Even basic skills could save my life. And that woman who just caught an arrow for me? I was going to make sure she fought by my side with the finest Damascus steel spear I could build. My father summoned the third prince first. The idiot walked in and immediately blurted out that the assassination had nothing to do with him, before my father even asked a question. Basically confessed without being accused. My father pounced on that instantly. The third prince panicked and threw the eunuch who'd tipped him off under the carriage, saying the messenger had told him about the attack. My father's eyes went cold. He was furious that palace staff were leaking information. The third prince swore on his life he wasn't involved and begged for a confrontation with the messenger to prove it. My father let him go but warned him. If any connection was found, there'd be no mercy. Then Mu Shun came in with a theory. He reminded my father that Banbu had received a letter by arrow the night before the banquet, and this arrow could be the same one. If Banbu had kept that arrow and used it for the assassination, it would simultaneously kill me and frame my brothers, creating chaos inside our court. My father thought it through and agreed it was plausible. He sent word telling me the assassin was likely one of Banbu's people left behind, and not to overthink it. At home, I considered the theory. It wasn't impossible. Banbu definitely wanted me dead, and he could have easily left 1 or 2 men hidden in the city when his delegation departed. But whether it was Banbu or the third prince, I'd use this incident to my advantage. I ordered Yi to conduct a thorough security sweep of the entire household. Anyone suspicious would be replaced. The assassination attempt gave me the perfect excuse to clean house openly. Shin Luoyan glared at me and complained I was bossing her sister-in-law around too comfortably. Then she declared herself my life-saving benefactor after catching that arrow. I offered to repay her with the Damascus steel spear I'd promised. Her eyes suddenly blazed with fury and she snapped. "Don't ever mention that thing to me again." I was completely confused. Yesterday, she couldn't stop talking about wanting a spear. Now it was a dirty word? Then it clicked. My comment at the blacksmith shop about my spear being good-looking and very hard. Yi must have explained the double meaning to her last night. She'd spent the whole day wanting to murder me over an innuendo I hadn't even met. Well, maybe I'd half meant it. I grinned and asked if she figured it out herself or if someone told her. She called me shameless. I told her I wasn't shameless. I had plenty of teeth, and they were very white. She looked ready to punch me through the wall. That night, I designed Shin Lian's Damascus steel spear personally. I also considered redesigning weapons for my soldiers. The standard issue wasn't suited for light cavalry, but decided to save those ideas for the border. Too much innovation in the capital would attract unwanted attention. The next morning, I dropped off the spear design at the blacksmith shop and headed toward Cat Ear Mountain to check on the training grounds. But something on the street caught my eye. 2 wealthy-looking young men carrying wooden Rubik's Cubes. I nearly fell off my horse. Someone had already manufactured and was selling Rubik's Cubes. It had only been days since I introduced the thing at the banquet. Who was this fast? I tracked them to a shop called Pina Pavilion on West Street. The place was mobbed. Rich customers were fighting to buy cubes. 20 silver taels for a basic 3-layer cube, 100 taels for the 16-square version I'd mentioned. Outrageous prices for carved wood blocks. And they were selling out instantly. Then the shopkeeper announced they were taking pre-orders with half payment up front. I was genuinely impressed. This merchant understood that once cubes became common, copycat products would flood the market and crash the price. By locking in pre-orders now at full price, they'd profit even if the market collapsed later. Brilliant business strategy. I waited until the crowd thinned, then walked in. I told the shopkeeper I wanted to meet the owner. He said his boss was busy and had a bad temper. He stepped forward and announced I was the 6th prince. The shopkeeper nearly collapsed onto his knees. I told him to skip the formalities and take me to his boss. Whoever this person was, they'd taken my invention, manufactured it without permission, and was raking in money. At minimum, I wanted to know who had this kind of speed, connections, and business sense. Someone with access to court information had heard about the Rubik's Cube and turned it into a product within days. The shopkeeper nervously agreed to lead me there, warning that his boss had a terrible temper and might even turn away a prince. Now I was really curious. The shopkeeper led me to a large courtyard buzzing with activity. Workers sawing wood, carving pieces, assembling cubes. A miniature factory. In the middle of it all sat the fattest man I'd ever seen. Easily 260 pounds. wearing dust-covered silk clothes while fiddling with a half-finished cube. Zhou recognized him immediately. Zhang Su, Elder Zhang's grandson. Apparently famous for being a complete failure, his grandfather was so ashamed of him that the old scholar refused to acknowledge him publicly. Zhang Su's grandson, a wastrel? Looking at the operation he'd built in just a few days, manufacturing, pricing strategy, pre-order system, this man was anything but useless. He was a natural businessman. He already knew I was coming. Before I even entered, he shouted loud enough for me to hear that anyone who mentioned the sixth prince would lose a month's wages. When his servant came back saying he wasn't home, I walked in anyway. The moment he saw me, he slammed an unfinished cube on the ground and yelled about smelling dog droppings. Gao he nearly drew his sword. Zhang Su shot back that he never said I was the dog droppings. Was Gao he implying that about his own master? Quick tongue on this one. I asked why he hated me so much when we'd never met. He said it was my fault he'd been kicked out of his grandfather's house. That caught me off guard. How was that my problem? I pointed out that the cubes were my creation. He claimed they were Bamboo's invention and his product was called Mo Fong, with a different character, Mold Cube, not Magic Cube. The audacity. He even argued there was no copyright issue. I threatened to bring Elder Zhang over. He shrugged. His grandfather had already disowned him, so what was the old man going to do? Disown him twice. This man had zero fear, zero shame, and an extremely sharp mind hiding behind layers of fat and attitude. I was starting to like him, but first I needed to find out what I'd supposedly done to ruin his life. Zhang Su finally told me why he hated me. Turns out, for years he'd used me as his shield whenever Elder Zhang scolded him. He'd say, "Even the sixth prince is useless, and he's royalty. So what's the big deal about me?" His grandfather couldn't argue with that. Then I went and became a national hero overnight. Suddenly Elder Zhang had ammunition. Even that worthless sixth prince managed to make the emperor proud. What's your excuse? The old man said it every single day until Zhang Su snapped back, and Elder Zhang exploded and kicked him out of the family. So in Zhang Su's mind, my success directly caused his exile. I couldn't help laughing. The man had a point, in the most absurd way possible. I grabbed a 4-layer cube from his stock. He screamed about me stealing his property, and I cheerfully told him I was openly robbing him and he could file a complaint if he wanted. Then I walked around his courtyard, solving the cube as we talked. Finished it in about 5 minutes. His eyes went wide, though he covered it with bluster about, "Practice makes perfect." I studied him as we walked. His family was full of scholars and officials, but he had zero interest in books. Everyone called him a failure. But what I saw was completely different. A man who'd identified a market opportunity, built a manufacturing operation, designed a pricing strategy, and created a pre-order system, all within days. That wasn't stupidity. That was genius in the wrong family. I told him straight. He wasn't useless. He was brilliant, just not at the things his grandfather valued. His real talent was business. I said I believed he could become the richest merchant in the entire empire. He froze. Then his eyes filled with tears. He grabbed my hands and started crying, blubbering that I was the first person in his life to ever say he had talent. He called me his soulmate, his one true understanding friend. It was a lot. A 260-pound man sobbing and clutching my hands in a dusty courtyard full of half-finished wooden cubes. But under all that emotion, I could see the fire igniting. He'd been beaten down his whole life, told he was worthless. One person believing in him was all it took. I'd found my future financier. My words completely flipped Zhang Su's attitude. The man who'd been cursing my name 10 minutes ago was now dragging me to the most expensive restaurant in the capital, calling me his soulmate and pouring his heart out over wine. His story was genuinely sad beneath the bluster. Growing up as the grandson of the empire's most respected scholar, surrounded by literary geniuses, and being terrible at the one thing his family valued, that had crushed him. Every accomplishment was dismissed as trivial tricks. Every failure was amplified. No wonder he'd turned bitter. He told me he avoided this part of town around the 15th of each month because the famous brothel nearby, Chuanfang Court, held poetry competitions. Whenever good poems came out of those events, his grandfather would hear about them and rage at Zhang Su for being less cultured than prostitutes' customers. I told him to stop hiding. Walk in there with 10,000 taels, order a dozen girls, and lounge like a king while those poetry scribbling geniuses watched in envy. Money talks louder than verse. His eyes went wide like I'd revealed the secrets of the universe. Then I steered toward business. I told him my ancient book contained many more inventions that could be manufactured and sold for enormous profit. He understood immediately. Before I even proposed a partnership, he suggested splitting the earnings 50-50. This man's business instincts were razor sharp. While we were talking, the fourth prince walked in. He spotted me dining with Zhang Su, the capital's two most famous failures, sharing a table, and couldn't resist a snide comment about birds of a feather. I smiled and asked how his injuries were healing from when our father beat him. His face went dark. He threatened to show me some concern, too. I kept my innocent face and said I was genuinely worried about him. In fact, my ancient book described a special healing ointment called chili oil that worked wonders on bruises. I offered to make him a bottle. Chili oil. On fresh bruises. The fourth prince didn't know what chili peppers were, but he'd find out eventually. He was struggling to keep a straight face behind me. The fourth prince didn't know what chili oil was, so my joke flew over his head. He threatened me instead, warning that my father's favor wouldn't last forever. I put on my saddest face and said I just wanted to memorize his face before I left for the north, so I could think of him fondly if I died on the battlefield. I deliberately used, "cherish your visage," a phrase normally reserved for dead people. He was thoroughly creeped out. But more importantly, I steered the conversation exactly where I needed it. I mentioned, loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, that my father had issued an imperial decree sending me north, and that decrees couldn't be reversed. I explained that the private guard he'd given me was clearly meant to serve as my escort to the border. The fourth prince paused. He hadn't considered that angle before. His friends started discussing it openly. The sixth prince was really heading north, into danger, where the northern kingdom would be hunting him. Within minutes, the entire restaurant was buzzing about it. Perfect. Another seed planted in public opinion. Every person who heard this would tell three more. Eventually, the whole capital would know about that decree, and my father would find it increasingly awkward to cancel it. Over the next 2 days, Zhang Su and I became an unlikely partnership. I taught him everything I could remember from my old world that was simple enough to manufacture. Kites, sliding puzzles, shuttlecocks, a version of football. Nothing threatening, just toys and games. Zhang Su was incredible with his hands. He'd take my rough concepts, improve the designs, and have production running the same day. We mass-produced each item and sold them fast, making good money before inevitable copycats appeared. "Eat your fill on the first bite," I told him. On the second evening, Zhang Su invited me to attend the poetry competition at Xuanfang Court, the famous brothel he'd been avoiding for years. He said I should go, observe the common people's lives, and understand their hardships. That was exactly the excuse I'd been planning to use myself. This man really was my spiritual brother. I coughed and agreed that as a prince, it was my duty to understand the people. Purely for research purposes, of course. We arrived at Xuanfang Court, and the madam practically threw herself at Zhang Su, clearly a regular customer. He slapped down 10,000 taels and demanded 10 girls for himself and 10 for me. I told him I was fine without, but he insisted tonight was about making everyone jealous. I gave a fake name, Lu, to keep my identity hidden. This was a research trip, strictly speaking. The madam set us up on the second-floor balcony with the most visible seats in the house, 2 oversized lounging chairs, and a swarm of beautiful women serving wine and fruit directly to our mouths. I have to admit, I loved ancient China in that moment. Below us, scholars and poets filed in for the competition. They all noticed us immediately. 2 men being pampered like emperors while they'd come to compete for 1,000 taels and 1 night with the house star. The jealousy was palpable. Some threw contemptuous looks. Others recognized Zhang Su and started mocking him, calling him the shame of the Zhang family, unfit to attend a poetry event. Zhang Su was in his element. He lounged back, waved at a girl, and announced loudly, "Go see which dogs are barking down there, and toss them a plate of meat to shut them up." The crowd below nearly rioted with rage, which only made him laugh harder. I told him to keep it down before someone came up and beat us. He didn't care. He was living his best life. Zhang Su explained how the competition worked. The house's top courtesan, a woman called Miaoyin, set the topic, and everyone wrote poems. She judged the winner, who received 1,000 taels and became her companion for the night. Miaoyin was famous across the capital, beautiful, talented in music, chess, painting, and poetry, and she never sold her body, only her art. Men competed fiercely just for her attention. Then the room went quiet. A clear, beautiful melody floated through the hall. When it ended, A woman in a purple veil walked gracefully onto the stage below. The poetry competition was about to begin, and the most celebrated woman in the capital was standing right beneath us. Zhang Su nearly jumped out of his chair when Miaoyin appeared. He was completely starstruck. She wore a purple veil, so nobody could actually see her face, but according to legend, she was devastatingly beautiful. I suspected she was mostly a product of brilliant self-marketing, but her voice was genuinely intoxicating. Every word dripped like honey. She announced the topic. Since the sixth prince was heading to the northern border soon, everyone should write a poem about going to war. My own story had become the poetry prompt. The rumor campaign was working even faster than I'd expected. A parade of talented scholars stood up one by one to recite their poems. They were all terrible. Forced rhymes, empty phrases, zero feeling. The crowd booed and laughed after each one. I leaned over to Zhang Su and whispered, "Did he want to become Miaoyin's companion tonight?" His eyes lit up. Of course he did. I whispered a poem into his ear, one I attributed to Yi Zi to cover my tracks. It was actually a famous war poem from my old world. Zhang Su's face went bright with excitement, then blank. He'd already forgotten the words. I had to repeat them. This man truly had zero capacity for memorizing literature. After another dozen mediocre poems, Zhang Su couldn't take it anymore. He stood up on the balcony and bellowed at the crowd below. "You call that poetry? Get out and stop embarrassing yourselves." The scholars erupted in outrage. Wang Xian mocked him, said a man disowned by the greatest literary figure in the empire had no right to speak. Meng Guangbai suggested they'd count it as a victory if Zhang Su could string together a single grammatically correct sentence. Zhang Su puffed out his chest and started reciting. A fine stallion bearing a jade saddle white, the battle done. The moonlit field grows cold. The drums upon the city walls. The drums upon, he froze. He'd forgotten again. He looked at me with desperate eyes. I hissed the next lines under my breath. He cupped his ear and asked me to speak louder. Louder? If I said it any louder, the whole building would know the poem wasn't his. This man was going to be the death of me. Everyone saw through Zhang Su immediately. A man reciting his own poem doesn't look around desperately for help halfway through. Meng Guangbai roared with laughter and called him a failure who couldn't even memorize stolen poetry. Zhang Su abandoned all pretense of dignity and fired back with language so crude the entire hall of refined scholars went speechless. When Meng Guangbai called him the shame of the Zhang family, Zhang Su bellowed that he'd sit on him and crush him to death. I nearly choked trying not to laugh. Miaoyin restored order with her silky voice. The competition continued. Wang Xian recited a decent war poem that earned applause. Then Meng Guangbai stood up with something genuinely good, ending with the line, "One frost-cold sword across 19 provinces." The crowd went wild. Even Miaoyin was nodding. Zhang Su begged me for another poem. I still had two in my head, but his memory was hopeless. He'd forget them before reaching the stage. I realized I'd have to do this myself. I stood up, swaying like a drunk. I'd been drinking steadily and played it up further. I looked down at Meng Guangbai and called his poem a trivial trick unfit for this stage. The whole room erupted. Who was this drunk nobody to insult tonight's best poem? Meng Guangbai sneered that anyone hanging around Zhang Su couldn't possibly have talent. The crowd howled with laughter. I told Meng Guangbai his father had some real ability, but he himself was like a half-empty jar. Lots of noise, no substance. Zhang Su was panicking beside me, certain I was too drunk to remember anything. I ignored him. I picked up a grape, popped it in my mouth, then raised a cup of wine and drained it in one swallow. I let the cup fall from my fingers. Then, slurring just enough to sound drunk but clear enough for every word to land, I recited, "Fine grape wine in a luminous jade cup. Drink up, the cavalry pipes urge you to ride. If I lie drunk on the battlefield, don't laugh. Since ancient times, how many soldiers ever came home?" The room went completely silent after my poem. People closed their eyes to savor the words. Drunk on the battlefield, don't laugh at me. Since ancient times, how many soldiers came home? It wasn't about bravery or glory like the others' poems. It was about accepting death with a smile and a cup of wine. Most people agreed it was superior to everything before it. Miaoyin looked up at me with genuine interest and asked my name. Zhang Su jumped in and gave my fake name. She asked me to finish the poem Zhang Su had botched earlier. I recited it perfectly this time, war drums still shaking the city walls, the golden blade in its sheath still wet with blood. Meng Guangbai, refusing to accept defeat, challenged me to produce another poem on the spot. The crowd agreed. Surely I was just drunk and boasting about being able to produce poems at will. So I gave them a third. Long clouds darken the snow mountains by the blue sea. A lonely fortress gazes toward the northern pass. Through 100 battles in yellow sand, the golden armor wears thin, but we won't return until the enemy is destroyed. Dead silence. Then the room exploded. 3 masterpiece-level poems in minutes, while visibly drunk. Meng Guangbai's face turned purple. But I wasn't done. I was here to accomplish something bigger than winning a poetry contest. I launched into a passionate, slurred speech. What was the point of writing war poems in a brothel? Real men should drop their brushes and pick up swords. The 6th prince was a royal who was willingly heading to the most dangerous border in the empire. What were they doing? The scholars hung their heads in shame. Zhang Su watched me in awe, silently admiring how shamelessly I was praising myself while pretending to be someone else. Meng Guangbai pushed back, arguing the emperor would never actually send me, the 6th prince, to the border. Others agreed. It was probably just for show, a quick trip to earn some easy military credit. That was exactly the debate I wanted. I exploded with righteous fury. The emperor had issued an imperial decree. Was that a joke? The emperor himself had led armies into battle 5 years ago. Was that just for show too? Then I delivered the knockout line, my voice booming across the hall. The emperor guards the nation's gates. The sovereign dies defending the kingdom. My words echoed through the hall. The emperor guards the nation's gates. The sovereign dies defending the kingdom. Nobody had heard that phrase before. I kept going, riding the momentum. The 6th prince was going north to fight in his father's place. He might be weak and talentless, but he wasn't afraid to die. All men must die. Some deaths weigh heavy as mountains, others light as feathers. If the prince's death could wake up the empire's men and light a fire in their blood, then his death meant something. I was performing the speech of my life, and I was pretending to be drunk while doing it. One young scholar stood up, bowed to everyone, and said my words had woken him from a dream. He left immediately. Another declared he'd enlist in the army tomorrow. Then more people started leaving, inspired or shamed into action. The poetry competition emptied out. Gao He and Zhou pulled me downstairs, playing along with my drunk act. As we left, I kept reciting poems at the top of my lungs. A 4th one about dying for your country without looking back. The remaining scholars looked ready to commit murder. For masterpiece poems in one evening from a drunk nobody was more than their pride could handle. Back home, I dropped the act completely. Not a trace of drunkenness. I called Yi Ziyin and told her all the poems were now officially hers. She was horrified. She hadn't written a single word and was now the capital's secret literary genius. She demanded to know what would happen when someone asked her to compose on the spot. I told her not to worry. I'd write her a stockpile. I sat down with my quill and produced over 10 poems in rapid succession, barely pausing between them. All war poems, all brilliant, or rather, all stolen from the greatest poets of my old world with minor adjustments. Yeezy watched in stunned silence as poem after poem appeared on the page. She said if I never reached the border, I could become the greatest writer of the age. I told her I'd rather be the lowest soldier than the finest scholar. Military power was everything. Poetry was just a tool. I handed her the pages and told her to memorize them, then burn the originals before dawn. Tonight's performance would spread across the capital by morning. 3 war poems about a prince heading north to die, recited by a mysterious drunk at the most famous venue in the city. Combined with everything else I'd seeded, public pressure on my father would become impossible to ignore. The big move was in motion. By the next morning, the entire capital was buzzing. My 4 poems and the passionate speech about the 6th prince heading north to die for his country spread through every street and alley. People praised the emperor's wisdom and my courage. The mysterious Mr. Liu became an overnight legend. My father was absolutely furious. He ordered a manhunt for the troublemaker who'd given that speech, because now, with the whole city celebrating his decision to send me north, he couldn't reverse course without looking like a coward. The drunk poet had trapped him perfectly. Elder Zhang came rushing in to confess his sins. He discovered his disowned grandson Zhang Su had been hanging around with me, teaching me frivolous tricks, and, worst of all, dragging me to a brothel. He was mortified. My father waved it off as nothing serious, more amused than angry. Then Mu Shun ran in with fresh intelligence. The mystery poet from last night appeared to be connected to Zhang Su. Elder Zhang, completely oblivious to why my father was really angry, helpfully clarified everything. He said, "Oh, that poet was the sixth prince. His poems were actually copied from his sister-in-law Yizi. He did make quite a speech defending your majesty's honor, though. Filial piety, at its finest." My father's face went through several shades of purple. The man he'd been hunting all morning, the one he wanted to drag into the palace and slap across the face, was me. His own son had orchestrated the entire public relations campaign that was now forcing his hand. He screamed for Mu Shun to summon me, then stopped himself. He thought for a long moment, visibly forcing himself to calm down. Then he gave a different order. Tomorrow, the entire royal family would go hunting at the southern gardens. All princes must attend, and I was specifically required to bring Shun Luoyin and Yizi. Elder Zhang kept trying to reassure him that I hadn't actually slept with any of the 10 courtesans Zhang Su had ordered. My father couldn't have cared less about the women. He was fixated on those poems and that speech, the drunk performance that had boxed him into a corner in front of the entire capital. I could practically hear his teeth grinding from across the city. That afternoon, I went to find Zhang Su and heard screaming from inside his courtyard. I rushed in to find him running for his life, face covered in bruises, with Shun Luoyin chasing him with a wooden stick. She was furious about the brothel visit and everything I'd said there. My drunk performance had spread across the entire capital, and now everyone knew I was heading north to die. She blamed Zhang Su for taking me there. I stepped between them. She told me to get out of the way. I grabbed her to hold her back, and she threw me to the ground like I weighed nothing. I ordered my 4 guards to restrain her. She beat all 4 of them down in seconds and went after Zhang Su again. I snapped. I rarely lose my temper, but she'd crossed a line. I shouted at her to stop. She froze. I got up, snatched the stick from her hands, and told her straight. The brothel situation was my fault, not Zhang Su's. If she wanted to be angry at me. Don't take it out on my people. Her eyes turned red. She screamed that she was doing this for my sake. I'd been an idiot at the brothel, shooting my mouth off, and now I'd publicly committed to going north where I'd certainly die. Did I think she was happy about marrying a dead man? She stormed out. On her way through the front gate, she kicked it to splinters. Zhang Su stared at the destroyed gate and whispered that my fiancé was quite the spirited person. I agreed. What bothered me wasn't the fight itself, it was what it revealed. Shen Luoyin wasn't just angry about the brothel or the poems. She was angry because she was starting to care whether I lived or died. She'd never admit it, but her rage came from fear, not hatred. Still, I had bigger problems. Tomorrow at the hunting grounds, my father was going to tear into me, and Lady Shun was probably plotting to have me strangled. I sent word to Yizi to go calm the Shun household down and explain enough of my plans to stop them from doing something rash. Some people needed to understand that my drunk ramblings weren't an accident. They were a carefully calculated move to guarantee my path to the north. I sent Yizi back to the Shun estate that evening to handle the fallout. I couldn't go myself. Lady Shun was calling me, that suicidal bastard, and Shen Luoyin was still ready to break my bones. Yizi was the only one who could calm them down. She went straight to Lady Shun and told her the truth, carefully, privately, away from Shen Luoyin's ears. She showed her the poems I'd written and explained they were mine, not hers. She told Lady Shun I hadn't been drunk at the brothel. Every word, every poem, every dramatic gesture was calculated. The whole thing was a deliberate campaign to force my father's hand and guarantee my passage north. Then Yizi went further. She revealed the rumors I'd had her spread, the stone prophecy I'd had her plant, how I'd manipulated my brothers into fighting each other, how I'd maneuvered the third prince into multiple humiliations. All of it. She told Lady Shen that everything I'd done since waking up in this body was aimed at one goal, getting to the northern border where I could build real power. Lady Shun was stunned. The man she'd dismissed as a hopeless fool had been running circles around the entire imperial court. She said something that Yizi later told me. If everything you say is true, this boy is terrifying. Someone who can hide this well for this long, deceiving everyone around him. His cunning is beyond imagination. She was worried too. If I reached the north and eventually rebelled, the Shen family would be dragged down with me if I failed. Yizi acknowledged the risk, but pointed out the cold truth. The Shen family had no choice. From the moment the emperor arranged our marriage, their fate was tied to mine. Even if they reported me, nobody would believe them. Lady Shin accepted it with a bitter laugh. She agreed to keep everything from Shun Luoyan. That girl couldn't keep a secret to save her life. Lady Shun would simply watch quietly and make sure her daughter didn't cause problems at critical moments. No sudden change in attitude, no visible shift in behavior. Business as usual on the surface. The board was set. My father would face me tomorrow at the hunting grounds. The Shin family was now quietly in my corner, and the whole capital was talking about the brave prince heading north to die for his country. That night, my father investigated the brothel incident. Mu Shun reported that the whole situation escalated because Meng Guangbai publicly questioned whether the emperor would really send me north. My drunk self had simply defended the imperial decree's honor. My father was furious, but at Meng Guangbai for provoking the debate, not at the outcome. He ordered the boy's father to discipline him, with a thinly veiled death threat attached. But the damage was done. My father admitted to Mu Shun that with the whole city now celebrating his wisdom in sending me north, reversing course would destroy his reputation. I'd boxed him in perfectly. The next morning, Shin Luoyan showed up in her hunting outfit, fitted combat clothes, bow and arrows, looking every bit the warrior's daughter. She still wanted to kill me. I'd prepared Yi Zi with another dozen poems in case my father tested her literary skills. Verses about hunting, landscapes, anything that might come up. At the hunting grounds, my brothers immediately started mocking me. I didn't bring weapons. What was the point when I could barely draw a bow? They laughed about my poetry night, calling me a plagiarist. I walked my horse right up to them and started staring at each one intensely, just like I'd done with the fourth prince at the restaurant. They squirmed. The fourth prince explained to the others with a grimace. He's memorizing your faces so he can think of you fondly when he's dead. Then I dropped my real bomb. I was thinking about asking our father to send one brother north with me, just to bring my coffin home if I died. Nothing dangerous. The four of them nearly fell off their horses in panic. The second prince immediately volunteered the third prince. After all, he'd promised to personally see me off. The fourth and fifth backed him up. The third prince fired back that the second prince was the eldest surviving brother and should go. Within seconds, their united front collapsed into another dogfight over who would be stuck accompanying me to the border. I sat back on my horse and watched them tear each other apart. Then my father's banners appeared on the horizon, and they all shut up instantly, though the murderous glances between them said everything. My father arrived with his entourage, including 2 consorts, but notably not the empress. Everyone noticed. The empress was finished. It was just a matter of time before she was formally deposed. The moment he sat down, my father started on me. Why didn't I bring weapons? I was supposed to be a general heading to war? Couldn't even shoot an arrow? Then he hit me about wasting time with Zhang Su making toys instead of training. I took it all quietly. I'd known this was coming when I pulled my stunt at the brothel. Then he revealed a beautiful long box containing a mystery prize. Whoever killed the most game today would win it. Every prince's eyes went bright. They all sensed this hunt might be connected to the crown prince selection. Even the 13-year-old 8th prince and 11-year-old 9th prince begged to participate. My father agreed and gave them double counting as a handicap. He turned to me with obvious contempt and said even children were braver than me. Then he made an interesting move. He allowed Shin Luoyan to hunt on my behalf, with her kills counting as mine. But there was a catch. If she won, I'd get the prize. If she lost, she'd share my punishment equally. He gave her the option to refuse. She accepted without hesitation. She was confident in her skills, and frankly, so was I. This woman had caught an arrow with her bare hand. Shooting animals was child's play for her. My father told me to go along as her assistant, carry her kills, pick up her arrows, make myself useful for once. I obeyed, but I'd already figured out his real game. He was sending me and Shun Luoyan into the forest to get us out of the way, so he could be alone with Yi Zi. He wanted to test her poetry skills personally, to verify whether the talented sister-in-law was really behind those famous verses. I'd prepared Yi Zi with over a dozen poems last night covering every possible topic. Hunting, scenery, war, emotions. She'd have something ready no matter what he asked. At least, I hoped so. The rules were set. No shooting birds to protect the emperor's prized exotic fowl, and everyone had to return by noon. The princes charged into the forest with their guards. Shin Luoyan grabbed her bow, shot me one last murderous glance, and rode in after them. I followed on my horse, ready to play pack mule for my future wife. Shin Luoyan charged ahead while I followed on horseback. We rode over 10 miles without seeing a single animal. Something was very wrong. This was a royal hunting ground. It should have been teeming with game. Then it clicked. My father had cleared the grounds beforehand. There were no land animals left to hunt. His order about not shooting birds wasn't really about protecting his exotic fowl. It was because birds were the only live creatures remaining, and allowing them would defeat the purpose of his test. We found a freshly killed deer in the forest with an arrow still in its neck, clearly planted there by my father's people. This was the real competition, not who could hunt the most, but who would be honest enough to refuse a free kill. My father was testing his son's integrity before choosing a crown prince. I immediately told everyone we weren't taking it. Zhou argued. Nobody would know, and we'd be punished if we lost. I shut him down hard. Taking credit for someone else's kill wasn't just dishonest. It was exactly the trap my father had set. Any prince stupid enough to claim those pre-killed animals would fail the real test. Shen Luoyan, to her credit, agreed without argument. She said she'd win on her own skills, or not at all. We found 2 more planted kills. Refused both. Time was running out. Noon was approaching fast. Shen Luoyan was getting frantic, cursing me as a bad luck charm. She rode off alone to cover more ground, leaving me with the guards. The moment she left, my guards started begging me again to go collect those dead animals. I lost my temper and threatened them with 50 lashes each if they mentioned it one more time. They went quiet, but I could see them nervously watching the sun climb higher. I appreciated their concern. They genuinely worried about the punishment Shen Luoyan and I would face. But I knew something they didn't. My father wasn't looking for the best hunter today. He was looking for the most honest son. Coming back empty-handed was the winning move. Shen Luoyan rode back triumphantly with 2 deer and several rabbits draped over her horse. My guards rushed to help load the kills onto their own horses. My heart sank. I looked closely at the animals. None of them were bleeding. For freshly killed game, that was impossible. Blood takes time to dry. These were planted kills, just like the ones we'd found earlier. Shen Luoyan had given up on her principles and collected the pre-killed animals, too anxious about losing to think clearly. I ordered everything thrown away immediately. She exploded, called me a jealous, useless waste who couldn't hunt and wouldn't let her succeed either. I told her bluntly, look at the animals, no fresh blood. She knew I was right. She'd grabbed them out of desperation, terrified of failing in front of the emperor after he'd praised her father. But admitting it only made her angrier. I shouted the order again. The guards reluctantly dumped every carcass. Shen Luoyan cursed me the entire ride back. Near the gathering point, we ran into the 3rd prince. His party was loaded with kills, 18 animals, including a massive bear. He saw our empty hands and couldn't resist gloating. He mocked Shen Luoyan, saying her father's legendary skills clearly hadn't been inherited. She was trembling with rage. I stayed calm. Then I offered him a bet, 50,000 silver taels, that he wouldn't win today's competition. He laughed in my face. With 18 kills, victory was guaranteed. He accepted without thinking. Perfect. This idiot had just fallen into the same trap as everyone else, but now he'd done it while betting me money on the outcome. When my father revealed that the whole hunt was a test of honesty and those planted carcasses were the real competition, the 3rd prince wouldn't just lose. He'd lose publicly, get punished, and owe me 50,000 taels on top of it. I smiled and wished him luck. He rode off smugly, completely unaware that I'd just added fuel to the fire that was about to burn him. We returned empty-handed. Every other prince had piles of kills displayed proudly in front of them. Even the 13-year-old 8th prince had a respectable haul. Only me and the 11-year-old 9th prince came back with nothing. The mockery was immediate and relentless. Every brother took turns ridiculing me. The consort even hinted I should be charged with deceiving the emperor. Shen Luoyan was furious. She told my father it was my fault for being too proud to let her help, which wasn't true, but at least deflected blame from her. My father scolded me and told me to stand aside while he dealt with the results. I caught Yi Zi's eye. She gave me a subtle nod, meaning she'd passed the poetry test. Good. At least that worked. I watched my father closely as he walked among the prince's kills, praising each one. He stopped at the 8th prince and complimented his impressive haul. But behind his back, his hands were telling a different story, clenching into fists, spreading open, gripping his own wrist. The man was physically restraining himself from hitting the boy. The 8th prince stood there beaming, completely oblivious that he'd just failed the real test spectacularly. A 13-year-old bringing back that many kills was obviously impossible without cheating. and he was too young to realize how transparent it looked. My father praised the ninth prince for coming back empty-handed, saying his young age excused him. Then he added, "Just don't grow up to be like your sixth brother." Looking at him makes me angry. That stung a little, but I knew it was theater. The consort sidled up to my father and suggested, with fake concern, that maybe I shouldn't go north since I obviously couldn't even hunt a rabbit. My father seemed to consider it, muttering that the border was quiet now and some experience might be good for me. The consort kept pushing, saying winter was coming and the northern kingdom might raid despite the grain deal. Mu Shun finished counting. The third prince led with 18 kills. Every other prince had substantial numbers, and I had 0. The trap was about to spring. I stood quietly next to Yi Zi and waited for the show. Mu Shun announced the results. The third prince led with 18 kills. The eighth prince had 9, doubled to 18, a tie. My father ruled the third prince won because his haul included a bear, which was more impressive. The consort from the eighth prince's side tried to argue age should matter, but my father's favorite consort shut her down. My father agreed. Before announcing the final winner, my father paused and asked if anyone had anything to say. I knew what he was really doing, giving the prince's guards one last chance to report the cheating. Nobody spoke up. Then the third prince made his move. Instead of staying quiet, the idiot actually stood up and asked my father to witness our bet. He wanted to make sure I couldn't back out of paying him 50,000 taels. I had to turn away and cough violently to hide my laughter. This moron was voluntarily drawing attention to himself right before the hammer fell. He was practically begging for extra punishment. My father asked about the bet. The third prince explained smugly. My father turned to me with a dark look and asked why I'd made such a wager. I mumbled that the third prince had mocked me for having no kills, and I'd gotten emotional. The third prince denied it and accused me of holding a grudge over the assassination attempt. My father asked if I had anything else to say. He was giving me the opening to expose the planted kills and blow the whole thing open. But I kept my mouth shut and shook my head. Let him think I was too timid to speak up. The moment I revealed I'd seen through his test, he'd start questioning what else I could see. Better to play dumb. Frustrated, my father declared the third prince the winner and had Mu Shun bring out the prize box. He told the third prince to open it in front of everyone. The third prince accepted the box with a perfect speech about how any gift from the emperor was a treasure. My father smiled and encouraged him to show his brothers what was inside. The third prince opened the lid with barely contained excitement. Then his face froze. His smile died. He stared into the box with wide, horrified eyes. I couldn't see what was inside yet, but watching his expression was already the best entertainment I'd had all week. The third prince opened the box. Inside was a thin yellow switch, the kind used to beat children. Everyone froze. The consort immediately demanded that Mu Shun investigate who'd swapped the treasure, but my father calmly announced the switch was exactly what he'd put inside. Then he dropped the hammer. He'd ordered the hunting grounds cleared of all animals 5 days ago. Every carcass they'd found today had been deliberately placed there this morning by his people. There were no live animals to hunt. Every single kill my brothers brought back was stolen from the planted piles. And the third prince's bear? Nobody had even placed a bear in the grounds. He'd brought his own. The color drained from every prince's face. They all dropped to their knees. Every one of them, except me and the 11-year-old ninth prince, had cheated. My father walked to the eighth prince first, a 13-year-old boy who'd somehow hunted 9 animals in a cleared forest. The boy started crying. Then my father turned his fury on all 5 cheating princes. He called my guards forward and asked whether I'd seen the planted kills. They confirmed I had, but that I'd refused to take them. They even covered for Shun Luoyan, saying we'd both agreed on principle not to claim animals we didn't kill ourselves. Shin Luoyan wanted to disappear into the ground. She knew the truth was more complicated, but at least the guards were loyal enough to protect her dignity. My father's voice shook with rage. Even the son you all call useless knows what integrity means. He has backbone. What do you have? He kicked all 5 princes to the ground, including the crying 8th prince. He turned on the consort for trying to help the 8th prince win, and on his favorite consort for trying to keep me from going north. Then he delivered the punishments. 50 lashes for every cheating prince's guards. The 3rd prince's guards, every single one, were sentenced to death. No exceptions. The 3rd prince had brought a bear that wasn't even part of the test. He hadn't just cheated. He'd come with a pre-planned scheme so elaborate it went beyond what the others had done. My father wasn't just angry. He was making an example. I stood quietly beside Yi Zi and Shun Luoyan, watching 5 princes grovel in the dirt. The bet with the 3rd prince was now certain to pay out. Not only had he lost the competition, he'd been publicly humiliated. Again, Shun Luoyan looked at me with completely different eyes. For the first time, I saw something there that wasn't contempt or anger. It might have been the beginning of respect. My father executed every one of the 3rd prince's guards on the spot. Their heads were piled up right there in the hunting grounds. The other prince's guards received 50 brutal lashes each. The soldiers beating them didn't dare hold back, with the emperor watching in a rage. Then my father grabbed the yellow switch from the prize box and personally whipped the 3rd prince, screaming between each strike. Where did the bear come from? Who helped him prepare it? Did he think his father was senile? The 3rd prince howled and begged while getting lashed over and over. Then my father called my name. I walked out. He told me to kneel. Are you serious? I had nothing to do with this. But when the emperor tells you to kneel, you kneel. He demanded to know why I hadn't reported the planted carcasses. I gave my prepared answer. I thought those animals had been wounded by other princes and wandered off to die. I genuinely believed they were someone else's kills, not planted evidence. He couldn't find a flaw in that logic. Then he hit me with the real question. Did I understand why he'd given me 500 private soldiers? I said yes. He wanted them to serve as my escort when I went north to the border. My father nearly had a stroke. He raised the switch, his face purple with fury. He screamed that he'd never intended to send me north. But after my performance at the brothel, the entire capital believed it was happening. He'd been backed into a corner. He roared, "Tell me, should I send you or not?" I scratched my head and looked confused, as if this was the first time I'd considered the question. Yi Zi, watching from the side, was mentally calling me every name in the book for my acting. My father ordered me to get lost. I stood up to leave, then stopped and innocently asked, "Father, does my bet with the 3rd prince still count?" The 3rd prince screamed inside. Of all the times to bring up the 50,000 taels, I chose the moment when my father was already beating him bloody. My father's rage reignited. He grabbed a fresh switch and thrashed the 3rd prince again, cursing him for having the shamelessness to bet against his own brother and then brag about it publicly. I bowed respectfully and led my group away while the sound of the switch cracking against the 3rd prince's back echoed across the hunting grounds. The consort stared daggers at me with enough hatred to melt steel, but she couldn't say a word. My only regret was not being able to stay and watch the rest of the show. But I'd accomplished everything I needed. My father had publicly admitted he was trapped by his own decree. The 5 cheating princes were disgraced, and the 3rd prince owed me 50,000 taels. Not bad for a man who brought 0 kills to a hunting competition.